Long before Greece gave us Olympian gods or Rome carved its myths into marble, the ancient Egyptians were telling stories of divine wars, magical resurrection, and eternal order. These were not just myths. For over 3,000 years, they were the foundation of how Egyptians understood the world, their place in it, and what lay beyond. Through shifting dynasties, religious revolutions, and cultural transformation, Egyptian mythology remained a powerful, evolving force. It helped people explain the flood of the Nile, justify the rule of pharaohs, and prepare the soul for judgment beyond death. This is the entire story of Egyptian mythology. Let's begin. Egyptian mythology begins not with gods as we might expect, but with a concept. At the very beginning, there was nothing. No land, no sky, no sun. Just an infinite, dark expanse of still water. The ancient Egyptians called this primeval ocean none. It represented not only water, but a total lack of form or purpose. This was the timeless chaos before anything was made. This idea of a pre-creation void appears in many cultures, but in Egypt, it had unique depth. None was not evil or hostile. It was simply undifferentiated potential. Out of this formless mass, the first act of creation would bring structure, light, and meaning to the universe. The Egyptians believed this happened not once, but again and again. Every sunrise, every new rain, every birth echoed the original creation. It was a cycle, not a singular event. According to the earliest records we have, dating back as far as the Old Kingdom, which began around 2600 BCE, creation was thought to take place in a small hill rising out of the watery Nun. The Egyptians called this first land the Ben-Ben, a word that likely relates to the ancient word for rising or shining. It symbolized stability, clarity, and the start of life. Over time, this idea would be echoed in the pyramid shape, the obelisks, and the pointed tops of temple shrines. Even the famous pyramids of Giza may have been inspired by this sacred concept of the first hill. From this hill, the creator god emerged. But who exactly that god was depended on where you were in Egypt. Unlike modern religions, Egyptian mythology was not unified by a single book or central authority. Instead, different cities developed their own traditions, which often coexisted and even blended over time. The result was a rich, layered system of belief that was constantly evolving. One of the oldest and most influential creation stories comes from Heliopolis, a city near modern-day Cairo. In the Heliopolitan tradition, the creator was Atum, sometimes fused with the sun god Ra. Atum emerged from the Ben-Ben and willed himself into being. He was entirely alone in the beginning, and he created the first gods by spitting, sneezing, or otherwise bringing them forth from his own body. These first divine beings were Shu, the god of air, and Tefnut, the goddess of moisture. Together, they formed the first generation of gods. Shu and Tefnut gave birth to Geb, the earth, and Nut, the sky. At first, Geb and Nut were locked in a tight embrace. Nothing could exist between them. So Atum, or sometimes Shu in later versions, lifted Nut above Geb, creating the space in which life could unfold. This physical separation of earth and sky was not just a story. It was how Egyptians explained the very shape of their world. Nut, the sky, was often depicted arched over the earth, her body covered in stars, while Geb lay beneath her, green and fertile. From Geb and Nut came 4 more gods: Osiris, Isis, Set, and Nephthys. These would become central figures in later mythological dramas, especially in the story of Osiris and Horus. But in the earliest layers, their importance was still forming. For now, what mattered was that the universe had structure, air, moisture, sky, earth, and a divine family to embody it all. Other traditions offered different accounts of creation. In Memphis, the religious center of Lower Egypt, the god Ptah was worshipped as the creator. Unlike Atum, who formed the world through physical acts, Ptah created through thought and speech. He conceived the world in his heart, considered the seat of intelligence in ancient Egypt, and spoke it into being with his tongue. This was a powerful idea. Creation not as labor, but as intention. Ptah's role would later link him to craftsmen, builders, and architects, making him one of the most important gods for those who shaped the material world. Further south, in Hermopolis, the priests imagined creation as the result of 8 primordial beings. These gods were grouped into male and female pairs, representing abstract qualities like darkness, hiddenness, infinity, and the absence of form. They existed in the waters of none and gave rise to a cosmic egg, or sometimes a lotus flower, from which the sun god emerged. In this version, the sun itself is the first creator, rising from the chaos and bringing life with its light. What connects all of these stories is not just the idea of creation, but the idea of cosmic order emerging from cosmic potential. The Egyptians did not see the world as a random accident. They believed it was carefully shaped by divine forces that continued to act in the world every day. This belief gave them a strong sense of continuity, stability, and purpose. It also placed human beings within a grand framework. People were not at the center of the universe, but they had a role to play. Their lives, rituals, and morals could support the balance that the gods had established. This principle would become known as Ma'at, the idea of truth, justice, and harmony. But that idea would take shape only after the gods themselves had come into full form. The concept of time in these early myths was also very different from the modern idea. Time was not strictly linear. The original moment of creation was seen as ongoing, repeated through rituals, festivals, and even the daily sunrise. When a new pharaoh took the throne, it was considered a renewal of the original act of creation. This repetition gave Egyptian religion a unique resilience. It was not tied to a single moment in the past, but to a living cycle that could be refreshed again and again. Historically, the earliest written versions of these myths appeared during the pyramid texts found in tombs of Old Kingdom pharaohs from the 5th and 6th dynasties, roughly between 2400 and 2100 BCE. These texts were carved into the walls of pyramids and describe the king's journey to the afterlife, referencing many of the same gods and forces from the creation myths. By this time, Egyptian mythology was already well developed, with a pantheon of gods, a structured cosmology, and a deep connection between myth and ritual. The origins of Egyptian mythology, then, are not just about who created the world, but about how the Egyptians understood creation itself as a process of bringing order to chaos, light to darkness, and meaning to the void. This would become the foundation for everything that followed: divine rule, cosmic justice, and the eternal struggle between balance and disorder. The mythology of ancient Egypt was not a fixed single system. Instead, it was a constellation of regional traditions, each rooted in a particular city or religious center. These local variations produced several different versions of how the world came into being. Rather than conflicting with one another, they coexisted, enriched the overall belief system, and allowed for the adaptation of mythology over time. Among the most influential centers of creation mythology were the cities of Heliopolis, Memphis, and Hermopolis. Each of these religious hubs produced a distinct theological vision that helped define Egyptian cosmology, politics, and culture for centuries. Heliopolis, located just northeast of modern-day Cairo, was among the earliest religious centers in ancient Egypt. Its name means City of the Sun in Greek, but its ancient Egyptian name was Yunu. Heliopolis was home to the Ennead, a group of 9 major gods who played key roles in the Heliopolitan creation story. At the center of this myth was Atum, the self-created god. Unlike later gods who were born into an existing world, Atum emerged alone from the waters of none. From himself, he produced the twin deities Shu, god of air, and Tefnut, goddess of moisture. These two in turn gave birth to Geb, the earth, and Nut, the sky. Then came Osiris, Isis, Set, and Nephthys. This divine family of 9, collectively known as the Ennead, became a framework not only for the creation of the world, but also for understanding divine authority and cosmic order. In Heliopolitan theology, creation was an act of self-generation and separation. The physical universe came into being as gods separated from one another and took on distinct forms. This division of elements, air, moisture, sky, earth, was more than symbolic. It explained the structure of the world and the relationships between divine forces that controlled it. The Heliopolitan system was deeply tied to kingship. Atum was closely associated with the sun god Ra, and over time, the two deities were merged as Atum-Ra. Since Ra was believed to travel across the sky each day and through the underworld at night, his mythological journey became a model for the pharaoh's rule over both the living and the dead. The solar temple of Ra in Heliopolis became a place of royal ritual, and many pharaohs sought to link themselves to the Heliopolitan tradition as a source of divine legitimacy. Further south, another powerful myth took shape in the city of Memphis. This was the capital of Egypt during the early dynastic period and much of the Old Kingdom. The Memphite creation myth centered on the god Ptah, a deity quite different from Atum in both nature and method. Ptah was not a solar deity or a personification of the elements. He was a god of artisans, builders, and architects. According to the Memphite theology, Ptah created the world not by physical separation, but by the power of thought and speech. He conceived the universe in his heart, considered the seat of the mind by ancient Egyptians, and brought it into existence by speaking its name. This doctrine is preserved in the Shabaka stone, a granite slab dating from the 25th dynasty, which claims to record an earlier Old Kingdom text. The stone presents Ptah as the supreme creator, declaring, "Ptah, the Great, is the heart and tongue of the Ennead. It is through what the heart thinks and the tongue commands that all gods come into being." This concept was profound. It emphasized the power of intention, of language, and of intelligent design. Ptah's method of creation linked the divine to craftsmanship, suggesting that every act of building or shaping the world was a reflection of divine will. It was a theological system well suited to Memphis, a city known for its masons, sculptors, and engineers. It also gave rise to the idea that the king, as a speaker of names and commands, played an essential role in maintaining cosmic order. Meanwhile, in Middle Egypt, the city of Hermopolis offered a third vision of creation. Known in ancient Egyptian as Kemenu, Hermopolis was the center of worship for Thoth, the god of wisdom, writing, and the moon. However, the city's creation story focused not on Thoth directly, but on a group of 8 primordial deities known as the Ogdoad. The Ogdoad consisted of 4 male and 4 female gods paired together: Nun and Naunet, the waters; He and Hauhet, infinity; Kek and Koket, darkness; and Amun and Amaunet, hiddenness. These deities were not anthropomorphic gods in the usual sense. Instead, they embodied abstract principles that defined the pre-creation state. According to Hermopolitan belief, the Ogdoad stirred within the watery chaos of Nun, and through their movement they brought about the conditions for creation. From this stirring came a cosmic egg, or in some versions, a lotus flower. From the egg or flower, the sun god, often identified as Ra, was born. His light broke through the darkness and began the process of creation. The symbolic richness of this myth is clear. It combines the generative power of the egg, the natural beauty of the lotus, and the life-giving force of the sun. It also reflects the Hermopolitan focus on abstract intellectual qualities, hiddenness, depth, and duality. These themes were closely tied to Thoth, who would later become one of the most important gods in Egyptian religion, especially in matters of law, timekeeping, and magic. Each of these creation myths, Heliopolitan, Memphite, and Hermopolitan, offers a different perspective on how the world came into being. But they were not seen as competing systems. Instead, they were understood as complementary truths. Different temples, priesthoods, and regions emphasized one tradition or another, but all were woven into the broader fabric of Egyptian theology. This flexibility helped Egyptian religion endure through countless political changes. As dynasties rose and fell, and capitals shifted, the mythology adapted. New gods could be merged with older ones, and regional cults could be integrated into state religion. The idea that multiple creation stories could all be valid reflected the Egyptian emphasis on balance and multiplicity. No single version was complete on its own, but together they formed a comprehensive picture of divine order. Over time, these myths would not remain abstract. They would become embedded in temples, royal ceremonies, funerary practices, and the daily life of the Egyptian people. The gods introduced in these stories, Atum, Ra, Ptah, Thoth, and others, would evolve, gain new roles, and interact in complex ways. The mythological universe would expand far beyond the moment of creation, encompassing love, betrayal, war, resurrection, and judgment. The most enduring and emotionally charged story in Egyptian mythology is not a tale of creation, but a family drama. At its heart is a divine lineage, Osiris, Isis, Set, and Horus, whose struggles defined the Egyptian understanding of life, death, justice, and kingship. This myth was not only widely told, it was deeply woven into the culture, religion, and political ideology of ancient Egypt for over 2,000 years. The story begins with Osiris, a god associated with fertility, civilization, and rule. According to tradition, Osiris was the first king of Egypt, a benevolent and wise ruler who brought agriculture, laws, and moral order to the land. He was deeply loved by his people and supported by his wife Isis, a goddess of magic, healing, and motherhood. Together they represented the ideal rulers, just, nurturing, and divinely favored. But Osiris had a brother, Set, who embodied the opposite traits. Where Osiris symbolized harmony and order, Set represented chaos, violence, and unpredictability. He was associated with the desert, storms, and foreign lands, places seen as threats to the carefully ordered world of Egypt. Set envied Osiris's success and popularity, and that envy turned into a desire for power. In the most well-known version of the myth, Set invited Osiris to a grand banquet and presented a beautiful wooden chest, perfectly carved and ornately decorated. He declared that whoever fit exactly into the chest could have it as a gift. One by one, the guests tried, but none matched. When Osiris lay down in it, the lid was slammed shut. Set and his conspirators sealed the chest with molten lead and cast it into the Nile. Osiris was drowned and carried away, disappearing from the land of the living. This act of fratricide sent shockwaves through the divine and mortal worlds. Without Osiris, the world lost its balance. Crops failed, the Nile stopped flooding, and darkness crept into Egypt. Isis, devastated but determined, began a long search for her husband's body. Her journey across the land, often depicted in temple carvings and sacred texts, symbolized loyalty, persistence, and the sacred duty to restore what had been lost. Eventually, Isis recovered the chest containing Osiris's body, but Set was not finished. He found the chest, tore the body into pieces, and scattered them across Egypt. In some versions, he divided it into 14 parts, in others, 16. Isis, assisted by her sister Nephthys and other sympathetic gods like Anubis and Thoth, traveled from region to region, gathering the parts. In doing so, she reassembled Osiris's body and used her powerful magic to restore him to life. However, Osiris did not return to the world of the living. Instead, he became the ruler of the Duat, the Egyptian underworld. There, he presided as judge of the dead, determining the fate of souls in the afterlife. His resurrection did not restore him to the throne, but it gave hope to the living, that death was not the end, and that the soul could live on through righteousness and divine favor. The story did not end with Osiris. Before his departure to the underworld, Isis conceived a child, Horus. The young god, born in secrecy and raised in hiding, was destined to avenge his father and reclaim the throne from Set. The conflict between Horus and Set became one of the most important mythic cycles in Egypt. It was not a single battle, but a long struggle, filled with debates, trials, and contests. In these stories, Horus and Set embody competing principles. Horus represents rightful order, succession, and the continuity of kingship. Set, on the other hand, is strength, force, and disruption. Sometimes their conflict is physical, epic duels or races. Other times it is legal, decided by the council of the gods in court-like proceedings. The gods argue, vote, and deliver judgments, illustrating how even divine rule must adhere to higher principles of justice. Eventually, Horus is declared the victor. He ascends to the throne of Egypt as the legitimate heir of Osiris. Set is defeated but not destroyed. In some versions, he is exiled. In others, he is even forgiven and given a role defending Ra on his nightly journey through the underworld. This resolution underscores a key theme in Egyptian thought. Chaos must be controlled, not necessarily eliminated. Set's strength could still be useful, if kept in check. The myth of Osiris, Isis, Set, and Horus became more than a story. It was a theological foundation. Pharaohs were seen as living Horus, the son of the divine couple, destined to maintain order. Upon death, the pharaoh became Osiris, ruler of the afterlife. His successor, often his son, became Horus in turn. This cyclical transformation linked royal succession directly to mythic precedent, giving divine legitimacy to every new ruler. Texts describing this myth appear as early as the pyramid texts of the Old Kingdom, around the 24th century BCE. They gain more detailed form in the coffin texts of the Middle Kingdom and become fully elaborated in the Book of the Dead during the New Kingdom. By the time of the Ptolemaic and Roman periods, the myth had become central not only to royal ideology, but to personal religion as well. Ordinary Egyptians began identifying with Osiris in death, hoping for rebirth and eternal life. Temples across Egypt honored the divine family. At Abydos, a major cult center for Osiris, annual festivals reenacted his death and resurrection. These public rituals included processions, mourning ceremonies, and theatrical performances. They were not just religious events. They were social acts of remembrance, participation, and communal identity. Isis, too, became one of the most widely worshipped deities in the ancient world. Her role as wife, mother, and protector resonated far beyond Egypt. By the 1st century BCE, her cult had spread across the Mediterranean. In Roman times, temples to Isis could be found from Spain to Syria. She was honored not only as the mother of Horus, but as a goddess of healing, fertility, and navigation. The story's emotional weight, the grief of Isis, the betrayal by Set, the innocence of Horus, gave it a timeless appeal. But for the Egyptians, it was also a reflection of how the universe worked. Death was not an ending, but a transition. Justice might be delayed, but not denied. Power must be based on moral right, not brute force. Through this myth, the Egyptians explained natural cycles, political succession, and moral order. The flooding and retreat of the Nile, the changing of dynasties, even the phases of the moon, all could be seen through the lens of Osiris and his family. It provided meaning in times of loss and guidance in moments of uncertainty. The myth also introduced complex ideas about divine behavior. The gods were not perfect. They made mistakes, felt jealousy, mourned, and debated. But they also grew, forgave, and sought justice. This gave the myth a human depth while preserving its cosmic scale. The myth of Osiris, Isis, Set, and Horus did not remain a tale confined to temples or funerary texts. In fact, one of its most important roles was political. It became the ideological backbone of the Egyptian monarchy. Beginning in the earliest dynasties, pharaohs were not only rulers, they were divine. They were believed to embody Horus, the victorious son of Osiris, who had restored order after chaos. And with each new coronation, that story was told again, not through words alone, but through ritual, architecture, and royal policy. The idea of divine kingship in Egypt can be traced back to the early dynastic period, beginning around 3100 BCE with the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt under the first pharaoh, Narmer. From this point on, the pharaoh was not viewed merely as a political leader or military general. He was the living Horus, chosen by the gods to maintain balance, enforce justice, and serve as the mediator between the human and divine worlds. This association was not symbolic. It was literal. In the minds of the people and the state, the pharaoh was Horus on earth. His role was to uphold Ma'at, the principle of truth, balance, and cosmic harmony. Just as Horus had overcome Set and brought stability after the murder of Osiris, so too was the pharaoh responsible for keeping the land safe from threats, both internal and external. This divine role was reinforced through titles. Egyptian pharaohs held a series of official names that connected them directly to the gods. The Horus name was one of the earliest and most important. It identified the king as the earthly embodiment of Horus and was often inscribed in a rectangular frame called a serek, above which sat the falcon of Horus. Later, additional titles were added, including the two ladies' name, referring to the goddesses Wadjet and Nekbet, the golden Horus name, the throne name, and the birth name, which usually appeared in a cartouche. These titles were not decorative. They were declarations of divine authority. Each one linked the pharaoh to a specific aspect of cosmic rule, and together they formed a system that placed the king at the center of the universe, both politically and spiritually. The mythology also influenced how kingship was represented in art and ceremony. In temple reliefs and statues, pharaohs are often shown wearing the crown of Horus, defeating Egypt's enemies, or offering gifts to the gods. These images were not depictions of events as they happened, but of ideals. They affirmed that the king was fulfilling his role in the divine order, maintaining the same justice that Horus had established when he defeated Set. One of the clearest examples of this integration of myth and rule is the Sed festival, a royal jubilee that celebrated the continued vitality and divine favor of the king. It was typically held after 30 years of a pharaoh's reign, although in some cases it occurred earlier or was repeated more than once. The Sed festival featured elaborate rituals, including the king running a symbolic race to demonstrate his strength and legitimacy. This echoed Horus's victory over Set, suggesting that the current ruler remained worthy to sit on the throne of Osiris. Another powerful expression of this mythological kingship can be found in the architecture of temples. In places like Karnak, Luxor, and Edfu, temples were not just places of worship. They were models of the universe, designed to reflect the structure created by the gods. Each temple contained an inner sanctuary that housed the cult statue of the deity, accessible only to the high priest or the pharaoh. Approaching the sanctuary was symbolic of moving closer to the divine. When the king entered the Holy of Holies, he was not just a visitor. He was participating in the eternal drama of divine rule, reinforcing his identity as Horus and reaffirming his responsibility to uphold Ma'at. This connection between mythology and political power also shaped how succession was understood. The death of a pharaoh was not seen as a break or crisis. Instead, it was a transition. The deceased king became Osiris, ruler of the afterlife, while his heir became Horus, ruler of the living. This continuity was essential to the stability of the state. It linked each generation of rulers into a single divine lineage stretching back to the first time, the mythical era when the gods themselves ruled Egypt. Even disputes over succession were often framed in mythological terms. During the first intermediate period, when central authority collapsed and rival dynasties emerged in different regions, rulers still claimed legitimacy through Horus names and divine endorsement. The myth remained intact even when reality was more complicated. It provided a framework through which rulers could justify their claims and maintain a sense of order, even in times of division. Throughout the Middle Kingdom and into the New Kingdom, this ideological structure became even more refined. Pharaohs like Senusret I and Thutmose III commissioned texts and monuments that reinforced their identity as living gods. The temples they built often featured scenes of coronation in which the king is crowned by Horus himself, or receives the emblems of rule from other gods like Amun or Ra. These depictions were not mere flattery. They were religious affirmations that tied royal power to cosmic destiny. The New Kingdom, beginning around 1500 BCE, also saw the emergence of more personal and theological reflections on kingship. Texts like the Instruction of Amenemope and the Teaching for King Merikare emphasized the moral responsibilities of the ruler. While still divine, the king was expected to be just, to protect the weak, and to uphold the law. These teachings reflect the evolution of the myth, from a story of divine succession to a guide for ethical governance. Even foreign rulers who came to control Egypt adopted this model. During the Ptolemaic period, Greek kings, such as Ptolemy I, embraced the role of divine pharaoh. They were depicted in Egyptian style, making offerings to the gods, wearing traditional crowns, and participating in temple rituals. Despite being outsiders, they understood that legitimacy in Egypt required alignment with the mythology of Horus and the divine kingship of Osiris. The Romans continued this pattern. Emperors like Augustus were portrayed as pharaohs in Egyptian temples, even as they ruled from Rome. They allowed the priesthood to continue its rituals, recognizing the importance of mythological continuity in maintaining peace and control. This long-standing link between mythology and political rule was one of Egypt's most remarkable achievements. While other ancient civilizations often separated religion and state, Egypt fused them completely. To rule Egypt was to participate in a sacred drama, one that demanded wisdom, strength, and moral integrity. The myth of Horus was not just a story from the past. It was a living framework that shaped law, ritual, and royal duty. This framework helped Egypt maintain one of the most stable civilizations in human history. For over 3,000 years, pharaohs ruled with a divine mandate that was both unshakable and adaptable. Through wars, famines, invasions, and internal strife, the myth held. It gave people a sense of continuity, purpose, and place in the cosmos. As the Egyptian understanding of divine order matured, one god came to symbolize the rhythm of life, death, and rebirth more than any other: Ra, the sun god. His journey across the sky and through the underworld formed one of the most powerful and enduring mythological cycles in ancient Egyptian religion. It was not only a story about the sun's movement, it was a cosmic narrative that embodied the eternal struggle between light and darkness, order and chaos, life and death. Ra's prominence rose during the Old Kingdom, especially during the 5th dynasty, which began around 2400 BCE. By this time, Ra had become central to royal ideology, and pharaohs often referred to themselves as sons of Ra. Sun temples were built in his honor, particularly around the city of Heliopolis, which had already established its status as a theological center. In many accounts, Ra was equated with Atum, the creator god of the Heliopolitan tradition, forming the composite deity Atum-Ra. This fusion emphasized Ra's dual role, as both the original creator and the ever-present source of life. Each day, Ra was believed to rise from the eastern horizon, sail across the sky in a solar bark, and descend into the western horizon at sunset. But his journey did not end there. At night, Ra entered the underworld, the Duat, where he faced dangers, obstacles, and, most importantly, the serpent of chaos, Apep. With each dawn, Ra's re-emergence was not simply the return of daylight. It was the victory of divine order over the ever-threatening force of disorder. Apep, sometimes called Apophis in Greek texts, was not a god, but a cosmic adversary. Described as a massive serpent or dragon, Apep represented the primal force of chaos that had existed even before creation. While Nun, the primeval waters, was neutral potential, Apep was active destruction. His purpose was to unmake the world, to swallow Ra's bark, and to plunge creation back into darkness. Every night, as Ra sailed through the Duat, Apep lay in wait. The serpent's attacks were fierce and relentless, causing tremors in the cosmos. The Egyptians explained natural events like earthquakes, solar eclipses, or violent storms as signs of Apep's temporary success. But Ra was never alone. He was accompanied by a host of gods, including Ma'at, who stood for truth and balance, and Set, who, despite his negative role in earlier myths, served here as Ra's fierce protector. Set's participation in this nightly battle shows the complexity of Egyptian theology. Though associated with violence and disruption, Set was also recognized for his strength and bravery. In the service of Ra, his destructive powers were redirected to preserve the cosmic order. This duality reinforced the idea that all forces, even those that seemed dangerous, could have a place in the larger balance of the universe. The journey through the Duat was described in great detail in texts such as the Amduat, the Book of Gates, and the Book of Caverns. These were funerary texts inscribed on tomb walls during the New Kingdom, particularly in the Valley of the Kings. They offered a map of the underworld, showing how Ra moved through 12 regions or hours, each with its own challenges and deities. In the first few hours, Ra encountered the souls of the blessed dead and the guardians of the underworld gates. As the journey progressed, he passed through caverns filled with serpents, lakes of fire, and pits of darkness. Midway through the night, in the 6th hour, Ra reached the point of deepest danger and transformation. Here, he united with Osiris, Lord of the Dead. This union was both symbolic and vital. It represented the merging of day and night, life and death, renewal and continuity. Following this moment, Ra was reborn as Khepri, the scarab-headed god who pushed the morning sun into the sky. The scarab beetle, observed by Egyptians to roll balls of dung across the ground, became a powerful image of regeneration and self-creation. It illustrated how the sun, and by extension life itself, was renewed each day after passing through the realm of death. This daily cycle was more than astronomical observation. It was theology in motion. Every sunrise confirmed that the world was still intact, that the gods had triumphed again, and that Ma'at still held. Rituals in temples often mirrored this cycle. At dawn, priests would awaken the statue of the god housed in the temple sanctuary, symbolizing the rebirth of divine presence. Incense was burned, hymns were chanted, and sacred texts were recited to align earthly time with cosmic rhythm. Ra's journey also carried moral implications. Just as he had to confront and overcome chaos each night, so too did human beings face moral and spiritual trials. The underworld, in Egyptian belief, was not simply a place of punishment or reward. It was a landscape through which the soul journeyed, tested by gods and weighed by truth. Ra's successful navigation of the Duat served as a model for the deceased, and his emergence at dawn gave hope that the soul could rise again. In temple art and sacred literature, Ra was depicted in multiple forms, each corresponding to different phases of his journey. As Autumn, he was the aging sun of evening. As Ra-Horakhti, he was the vigorous morning sun. As Khepri, he was the newborn sun of dawn. This fluidity allowed the Egyptians to explore different aspects of time, change, and renewal within a single god. It also made Ra one of the most adaptable deities in the Egyptian pantheon. The influence of the solar mythology extended into many areas of Egyptian life. The orientation of temples, with entrances facing east, mirrored the path of the sun. Sun discs were placed above doorways and in religious iconography to invoke divine protection. Even the Ankh, the symbol of life, was often associated with solar light and energy. Pharaohs adopted solar names, built sun temples, and commissioned hymns praising their connection to Ra. One such hymn from the reign of Akhenaten, long before his monotheistic reforms, refers to Ra as the giver of breath, the one who causes the lands to live. In time, Ra was fused with other major gods, reflecting the evolving nature of Egyptian theology. Ra was combined with Amun to form Amun-Ra, the supreme deity of the New Kingdom. This syncretism allowed older religious ideas to remain relevant even as new political centers and theological schools emerged. The myth of Ra and his solar journey provided more than a story. It offered a way to understand the structure of time, the nature of the soul, and the resilience of order in the face of destruction. It reminded the Egyptians that creation was not guaranteed. It had to be maintained. The sun rose not because it was destined to, but because the gods fought for it to rise. In this worldview, light was always a victory, and each day was a gift earned through divine struggle. While the myth of Osiris and Horus explained succession and justice, the myth of Ra explained motion, continuity, and the battle to keep the world from unraveling. These stories did not contradict each other. They worked together to build a comprehensive cosmology that touched every part of life. In the complex tapestry of Egyptian mythology, one concept stands above all others, not as a god in the usual sense, but as the very foundation of reality. That concept is Ma'at. Often depicted as a serene goddess with a single ostrich feather on her head, Ma'at was more than a divine figure. She represented the essence of order, truth, justice, and harmony. She was not born from mythic drama or divine rivalry. Instead, she embodied what the Egyptians believed the universe must be: balanced, purposeful, and just. Unlike other mythological beings who rose to power through birth, battle, or succession, Ma'at existed from the moment creation began. She was present in the first breath of the world, when structure emerged from chaos. Without Ma'at, the acts of Atum, Ta, and Ra would have been incomplete. Creation, in Egyptian understanding, was not just the making of matter, it was the establishment of order. That order was Ma'at. For the Egyptians, Ma'at was both a divine principle and a living force. She governed the movement of the stars, the changing of the seasons, and the annual flooding of the Nile. These natural rhythms were not just scientific phenomena. They were expressions of cosmic order. When the Nile flooded as expected, replenishing the land, it was a sign that Ma'at prevailed. When it failed, or when disorder struck, such as war, famine, or rebellion, it was seen as a disturbance of Ma'at. This worldview placed enormous responsibility on the pharaoh. As the living Horus and the earthly representative of the gods, the pharaoh was not just a ruler, he was the guardian of Ma'at. His role was to uphold this cosmic balance, not only through military and political power, but through righteous leadership. When a king was just, fair, and generous, he was said to do Ma'at. When he was corrupt or weak, he endangered the very fabric of creation. This understanding is clearly reflected in royal inscriptions across Egypt. Kings boasted not just of their victories, but of their dedication to Ma'at. In a typical example, one pharaoh declared, "I have built temples, I have given bread to the hungry, I have made justice thrive, I have established Ma'at." These acts were not mere public relations, they were theological duties. But Ma'at extended beyond the pharaoh. Every individual was expected to live according to her principles. In daily life, this meant speaking truthfully, acting with kindness, fulfilling promises, and honoring one's social responsibilities. There was no sharp divide between religion and ethics in ancient Egypt. To live well was to live in harmony with Ma'at. The importance of Ma'at is especially visible in Egyptian ideas about the afterlife. In the Hall of Judgment, a key moment in the soul's journey through the underworld, the heart of the deceased was weighed against the feather of Ma'at. This was not a metaphor. Egyptians believed that the heart, as the seat of emotion, memory, and conscience, retained a record of a person's deeds. If the heart was lighter than or equal to the feather, the soul could proceed into the blessed afterlife. If not, it was devoured by a terrifying creature called Ammit, part lion, part crocodile, and part hippopotamus. This scene, known from countless tombs and papyri, is central to the Book of the Dead, the coffin texts, and other funerary literature. It conveys a deep moral truth, that one's conduct in life directly influenced one's fate in death, and it emphasized personal responsibility. Unlike some later religious systems, Egyptian religion did not focus on belief in specific doctrines. What mattered was behavior, honesty, and the alignment of one's life with Ma'at. The legal system also reflected this principle. Courts in ancient Egypt were not just administrative bodies, they were extensions of Ma'at. Judges were often priests or officials who took an oath to uphold Ma'at and reject Isfet. Isfet was the opposite of Ma'at, a word meaning chaos, falsehood, and injustice. The battle between Ma'at and Isfet was not only fought in the heavens by gods like Ra and Set. but in everyday decisions by farmers, scribes, and families. This expectation shaped Egyptian literature as well. Wisdom texts such as the Instruction of Ptahhotep and the Maxims of Ani advised readers to practice humility, patience, and fairness. These writings, copied by generations of scribes, were not just educational, they were ethical guides. One passage urges, "Do not be arrogant because of your knowledge, but consult with the ignorant as with the wise." Good speech is more hidden than greenstone, yet it may be found among servant girls at the grindstone. Even rituals were infused with the presence of Ma'at. In daily temple ceremonies, priests offered a small image or symbol of Ma'at to the deity being worshipped. This was more than a gift. It was a renewal of the cosmic agreement. The act said, in effect, we are still in balance. We are still honoring what was established at the dawn of time. Interestingly, Ma'at did not spread as a religious system beyond Egypt's borders, as the cults of gods like Isis or Osiris later did. This may be because Ma'at was too deeply tied to the Egyptian worldview, geography, and societal structure. It was not a doctrine to be exported, but a way of being rooted in the Egyptian understanding of the world. Yet, within Egypt, her influence was unmatched. From the architecture of temples to the structure of government, from the ethics of personal life to the theology of the cosmos, Ma'at was the golden thread that connected everything. She required no miracles, no temples filled with her images, and no dramatic myths of birth or conquest. She simply was the invisible architecture of the universe. When Egypt fell under foreign rule, first by Persians, then Greeks, and finally Romans, the concept of Ma'at remained. Even foreign rulers who adopted Egyptian titles and performed temple rituals were expected to honor her. In inscriptions, they continued to portray themselves as doers of Ma'at, protectors of order, and enemies of chaos. The concept's endurance was a testament to its power. Ma'at's subtlety may be why she is less well known today than gods like Ra or Isis. But in ancient Egypt, she was everywhere. She was the reason the stars moved, the Nile flowed, the crops grew, and society endured. She was the invisible force behind the visible world. As the Egyptians saw it, without Ma'at, there would be no sunrise, no justice, no peace. There would be only Isfet, disorder, lies, and destruction. That belief made every act of truth, kindness, and fairness an act of cosmic significance. The mythology of ancient Egypt was not confined to celestial journeys or royal ideology. It was deeply rooted in the physical environment, especially the Nile River, the deserts, and the fertile land between them. To the ancient Egyptians, nature was not simply a backdrop for divine stories. It was divine. Every natural process, from the rise of the Nile to the sprouting of grain, was animated by gods and goddesses who governed the forces that made life possible. The Nile River, which flows from south to north through the length of Egypt, was the lifeblood of the civilization. Its annual flood deposited rich black silt on the land, enabling agriculture in a region otherwise surrounded by desert. This cycle of flooding, planting, and harvesting was central to survival, and it was also central to religious life. The river was seen as a divine artery, and its behavior was understood through mythology. The god most closely associated with the Nile itself was Hapi. Despite the name's phonetic similarity to happy, Hapi was a serious and deeply respected deity. He was portrayed as a well-fed, androgynous figure with pendulous breasts and a protruding belly symbolizing nourishment and abundance. Hapi wore a crown made of water plants, papyrus for the north, lotus for the south, emphasizing his role in uniting Upper and Lower Egypt through the river's course. Hapi was not a creator god, nor did he have a large mythology filled with personal drama. His significance came from constancy. Each year, when the Nile began to rise in late summer, priests offered hymns and sacrifices to Hapi, thanking him for the life-giving waters and praying for a generous but not destructive flood. One hymn proclaims, "Hail to you, Hapi, who comes forth from the earth, who comes to nourish Egypt, who makes all people live with his bounty." The success or failure of the flood was not merely a practical matter, it was a spiritual signal. A high flood meant prosperity, a low one meant hunger, an excessively high one could cause destruction. In all cases, it was seen as a reflection of divine favor or displeasure. The flood's rhythm became part of the liturgical calendar, and state officials even monitored and recorded the Nile's height on special structures called nilometers, which were treated almost like sacred instruments. Alongside Hapi, other deities shaped the landscape. One of the most important was Geb, the god of the earth. Geb was part of the original divine family in the Heliopolitan cosmogony and represented the living soil. He was usually depicted lying on his back, often with vegetation sprouting from his body, while his sister and consort Nut arched over him as the sky. The separation of Geb and Nut, enforced by their father Shu, was not only a creation myth, it was a daily reality. The earth and sky remained apart to make space for life, and the gods kept them that way. Nut, the goddess of the sky, was another essential part of nature's divine system. She was often portrayed as a celestial woman stretching across the heavens, her body covered with stars. Each night, she swallowed the sun god Ra, and each morning, she gave birth to him again. This cycle reinforced the idea that nature was not just governed by gods, it was the gods. Nut's embrace of the world was both literal and symbolic, a reminder that the cosmos itself was divine. The deserts that flanked the Nile Valley were also home to powerful mythological forces. Unlike the fertile Black Land, Kemet, the deserts were called Deshret, the Red Land, a place of danger, chaos, and death. These regions were often associated with Set, the god of storms and disorder, who we have already encountered in his role as Osiris's murderer and Horus's rival. But in the natural world, Set also served as a protector. He was believed to guard the solar bark of Ra from Apep during the night journey. In this way, the harshness of the desert was not purely evil. It had a role in preserving the balance of the world, much like the role Set played in the mythic realm. Water and land, sky and desert, fertility and destruction, all were infused with divine presence. But no aspect of nature was more central to Egyptian life than fertility. To the Egyptians, fertility was not only about reproduction. It was the renewal of the land, the growth of crops, the continuation of life in all its forms. One of the most beloved fertility goddesses was Renenutet, sometimes depicted as a cobra or a woman with a serpent's head. She protected granaries, guarded the harvest, and ensured food security. Farmers made offerings to her during the harvest season, and she was sometimes merged with or closely associated with other deities like Isis and Wadjet. In fact, Wadjet herself, one of the protective goddesses of Lower Egypt, was also symbolized by a cobra and linked to royal authority, tying nature to kingship. Another key figure was the frog-headed goddess Heket, who presided over childbirth and the renewal of life. Frogs, which multiplied after the Nile flood, were natural symbols of fertility. Heket assisted women during labor and was invoked in spells and amulets for safe delivery. Her presence in mythology reminds us that Egyptian religion was not distant or abstract. It touched every part of life, including the most intimate and personal moments. Then there was Min, a god of fertility and harvest, whose cult dated back to the pre-dynastic period. He was often portrayed in an erect state, holding a flail and wearing a tall plume headdress. While this imagery might seem startling to modern eyes, for the Egyptians, it was a symbol of vital life force. Festivals held in Min's honor involved ceremonial plowing, offering the first fruits of the harvest, and public rituals of regeneration. These ceremonies reaffirmed the connection between agricultural abundance and divine blessing. The cow goddess Hathor also played a vital role in natural abundance. Though known for love and music, Hathor was equally associated with motherhood, fertility, and the nourishing qualities of milk. She was sometimes identified as the mother of the king and believed to nurse the pharaoh. Her temples were filled with scenes of joy, music, and celebration, expressions of life flourishing under her care. These gods and goddesses were not isolated figures. They were part of a web of divine forces that explained and shaped the physical world. When Egyptians planted seeds, watched the Nile rise, or looked up at the stars, they did not see anonymous forces of nature. They saw divine personalities, each with intentions, moods, and relationships. This worldview helped Egyptians manage uncertainty. A failed crop or a disease outbreak was not just misfortune, it was a disruption of divine harmony, perhaps due to human error, neglect of ritual, or cosmic imbalance. Through prayer, offerings, and correct behavior, balance could be restored. Myth and nature were intertwined, and both required care. Temples often reinforced this connection. The Temple of Karnak, for example, was oriented to align with solar and stellar events. The Temple of Edfu, dedicated to Horus, featured inscriptions about the Nile's role in creation. In local shrines, farmers and villagers left simple offerings, bread, beer, flowers, or clay models, thanking the gods for the fertility of their land. Religion was not an elite pursuit. It was a lived reality, shaped by the rhythm of nature. As Egyptian civilization evolved, the importance of these nature gods never diminished. Even during foreign rule, their cults remained active, their festivals continued, and their images endured on temple walls and amulets. They were the guardians of Egypt's most precious gift, its land and water. One of the most striking and memorable features of Egyptian mythology is its portrayal of gods with animal forms or attributes. To many outside observers, both in the ancient world and today, this aspect of Egyptian religion has often seemed strange or even superstitious. But to the Egyptians, these depictions were neither literal nor primitive. They were symbolic representations of divine qualities, carefully chosen to reflect each god's nature, power, and role within the cosmic order. In Egyptian belief, animals were not simply creatures of the earth. They were spiritual beings, linked to the divine and often regarded as manifestations of specific gods. This worldview emerged not from fantasy, but from close observation of nature. Egyptians watched how animals behaved, where they lived, and how they interacted with their surroundings. From these observations, they drew symbolic meanings that informed their religious imagination. Among the most well-known of these animal deities is Anubis, the jackal-headed god of embalming and the dead. Jackals were commonly seen in cemeteries, where they scavenged among the tombs. Rather than viewing this as a threat, the Egyptians interpreted it as a sign that jackals were guardians of the dead. Anubis became the protector of graves and the guide of souls. He was responsible for the mummification process and was often depicted attending to the dead during the weighing of the heart ceremony. His black coloration, though not typical of actual jackals, symbolized both the color of mummified flesh and the fertile black soil of the Nile, a symbol of rebirth. Another prominent example is Bastet, the cat goddess. Bastet began as a lion-headed warrior deity, but gradually became associated with domestic cats as they gained prominence in Egyptian households. Cats were admired for their agility, grace, and protective instincts, especially in keeping vermin away from food stores. Bastet came to embody the nurturing, protective aspects of femininity, as well as the joy of music and festivity. She was widely worshipped, and her cult center at Bubastis became one of the most important in the Delta region. Cats were so highly regarded that killing one, even accidentally, was a serious crime. Thoth, the god of wisdom, writing, and the moon, was often depicted as an ibis or a baboon. Both animals were closely associated with thought and knowledge. The ibis, with its deliberate movements and long beak, was linked to precision and logic. The baboon, observed for its behavior and human-like qualities, was believed to greet the rising sun with cries of reverence. Thoth played a vital role in maintaining the universe. He recorded the results of the judgment of the dead, maintained the calendar, and resolved disputes among the gods. His animal forms reinforced his identity as a mediator of knowledge and cosmic balance. The crocodile god Sobek represented power, fertility, and the might of the Nile. Crocodiles, while dangerous, were also vital parts of the river ecosystem. Sobek was feared and revered. He protected people from the threats of the river while also symbolizing its strength. His cult was especially strong in the Fayum region, where sacred crocodiles were kept in temple pools adorned with jewelry and fed lavishly. Some were even mummified after death. Horus, though primarily known as the falcon-headed god of kingship and the sky, also demonstrates the connection between animals and divinity. Falcons soar high above the earth, sharp-eyed and swift. To the Egyptians, the falcon represented royal oversight, vision, and control. Horus's piercing gaze symbolized the vigilance of the pharaoh, and his sharp talons the swift enforcement of justice. The pharaoh himself was often called the Great Falcon, further linking the monarchy with divine sight and authority. Another falcon-related deity, Montu, was a war god whose image also combined human and falcon forms. While Horus was associated with divine rule and succession, Montu symbolized aggressive strength and military prowess. Soldiers and generals sought his favor before going into battle, and some pharaohs even took his name to show their martial power. Hathor, often depicted as a cow or as a woman with cow horns and a solar disk, embodied joy, motherhood, and the nourishing aspects of life. The cow was not a beast of burden in Egyptian symbolism. It was a symbol of maternal care and abundance. Hathor's temples often featured columns shaped like her head, and she was seen as a divine mother to the pharaoh. Her festivals were occasions of music, dance, and drinking, reinforcing her role as a goddess of celebration and life's pleasures. Apis, the sacred bull of Memphis, held a unique position as a living deity. Unlike most gods, who were represented in statues and symbolic forms, Apis was an actual bull selected for specific markings and raised in the temple as an incarnation of Ptah. When an Apis bull died, it was given a state funeral, mummified, and entombed with great ceremony. The search for a new Apis bull would then begin, ensuring continuity in divine presence. This practice illustrates how seriously the Egyptians took their belief in the divine embodiment of animals, not as metaphor, but as living truth. Animal deities could also have more fearsome aspects. Sekhmet, the lion-headed goddess of war and plague, represented the destructive power of the sun. She was said to breathe fire against Egypt's enemies and could unleash disease when angered. Yet, she was also a healer when appeased, showing the dual nature of many Egyptian gods, capable of harm or healing depending on how they were treated. Taweret, the protective goddess of childbirth, was an amalgamation of several animals. She had the head of a hippopotamus, the limbs of a lion, the back of a crocodile, and the breasts of a human woman. These features might seem strange, but each was symbolic. The strength of a lion, the protective fierceness of a mother hippo, the fearsome tail of a crocodile. She stood guard over mothers and infants, warding off evil spirits and ensuring safe births. The presence of animal forms in Egyptian religion also extended to amulets, statues, and burial practices. Scarabs, beetles associated with the god Khepri, were commonly worn for protection and rebirth. Khepri, representing the rising sun, was imagined as a scarab beetle pushing the sun across the sky, just as the beetle pushes its ball of dung across the ground. These scarabs were carved into jewelry, placed in tombs, and even used as official seals. Throughout temples, tombs, and homes, depictions of animal-headed gods were not seen as odd or grotesque. They were honored images, full of layered meaning. These forms allowed the Egyptians to express complex ideas through instantly recognizable symbols. A falcon meant vision and power. A crocodile meant danger and vitality. A cat meant protection and grace. The combination of human and animal features created a bridge between the seen and the unseen, the material and the spiritual. Importantly, these depictions were not idolatry in the modern sense. Egyptians did not believe that the image was the god in totality. Rather, the image was a vessel, a way for the divine to be present in the human world. The animal forms were symbols of traits, not literal bodies. This symbolic language allowed Egyptian religion to remain both flexible and deeply personal. A farmer could wear an amulet of Bastet for household safety, while a soldier might pray to Montu before battle. The gods were many, and their animal forms allowed them to meet people where they lived. Even after Egypt came under the rule of Greeks and Romans, many of these animal deities remained central to religious practice. Some were absorbed into new syncretic forms. Isis, for instance, took on attributes from many older goddesses, but the animal imagery continued. The fascination with Egyptian animals even influenced Greek and Roman writers, who recorded temple practices and sometimes misunderstood the deep symbolic structure behind them. To the ancient Egyptians, magic was not a fringe belief, nor was it separate from religion or science. It was a fundamental force that animated the universe, present in the gods, accessible to humans, and necessary for the world's continued existence. This force was known as Heka, both a concept and a divine being. Far from being seen as illusion or deception, Heka was regarded as a natural and sacred energy, one that made creation possible, sustained life, and allowed gods and mortals to interact. The word Heka can be traced back to the earliest religious texts of ancient Egypt, appearing already in the pyramid texts during the Old Kingdom, around the 24th century BCE. There, Heka is described as a divine power that existed before the gods themselves. In one hymn, Heka declares, "I am Heka, that existed before the gods were formed." This is not poetic exaggeration. It reflects a central Egyptian belief that magic was not an invention of gods or people. It was older than creation itself. Heka was also personified as a deity, often shown as a man holding two entwined serpents. He was sometimes associated with the creator god Khnum, and in later periods, he was considered the patron of physicians and magicians. As a divine figure, Heka empowered both gods and humans to act within the world. When Ra spoke the names of the first gods into being, he used Heka. When Isis resurrected Osiris and conceived Horus, she used Heka. Magic was the invisible engine behind divine actions and mythological events. For ordinary Egyptians, Heka was woven into everyday life. It was used to heal the sick, protect the home, ensure safe childbirth, and guard against evil spirits. Magic was not restricted to priests or specialists, although certain individuals were more skilled in its use. Farmers, craftsmen, mothers, and merchants all used charms, prayers, and ritual acts that drew on the power of Heka. One of the most widespread uses of magic was in healing. Medical papyri, such as the Ebers Papyrus and the Edwin Smith Papyrus, contain hundreds of remedies for physical ailments, many of which combined practical treatment with magical incantations. A typical entry might prescribe a mixture of herbs and honey, followed by a spoken charm invoking a deity such as Thoth or Isis. The logic was not contradictory. Physical and spiritual health were seen as interconnected. A disease might be caused by a blocked channel in the body, a cursed object, or a malevolent spirit, and all required treatment through Heka. Amulets played a major role in magical protection. These small objects, often made of faience, stone, or metal, were inscribed with symbols or spells and worn around the neck, wrist, or ankle. Popular amulets included the Ankh for life, the Eye of Horus for protection, and the Scarab for rebirth. Each was believed to carry the essence of a god or divine principle. Even animals, such as cats or frogs, were represented in amulets to draw their associated qualities into the wearer's life. Certain individuals became known for their mastery of Heka. These included priests, temple scribes, and lay magicians who specialized in crafting spells, interpreting omens, and invoking divine aid. Some of these practitioners worked within the temple system, while others operated independently. In both cases, they were often called upon for help in situations of crisis, illness, nightmares, infertility, or disputes. Magical texts were copied onto papyrus scrolls, pottery shards, and even linen. These texts could be stored in homes, buried with the dead, or used during rituals. One famous example is the Sipi of Horus, a type of healing stela that depicted Horus as a child standing on crocodiles, holding scorpions and snakes. The image was accompanied by protective spells and was used to cure bites or stings from venomous animals. The patient's water would be poured over the stela, absorbing its power, and then consumed as a healing drink. This practice combined visual symbolism, spoken word, and physical action, hallmarks of Egyptian magical thinking. The use of Heka was not limited to healing and protection. It also extended to transformation and spiritual communication. In funerary rituals, magic was essential. The Book of the Dead, often placed in tombs during the New Kingdom, was filled with spells to guide the soul through the underworld. These texts helped the deceased overcome obstacles, speak the right words at the right gates, and appear before Osiris with a heart free of guilt. Without Heka, the journey to the afterlife was perilous or impossible. Isis, the goddess of magic par excellence, embodied the highest form of Heka. Her mastery of spells was central to the resurrection of Osiris and the conception of Horus. In one tale, Isis gains power over Ra by learning his secret name, a profound act that reveals the deep Egyptian belief in the magical force of names. To know the true name of a being was to hold power over it. This idea is echoed in countless incantations, where the correct naming of gods, spirits, or even objects was crucial to the spell's success. Names, images, and spoken words all had magical significance. Writing itself was considered a sacred art. Hieroglyphs were not just letters or symbols. They were living signs imbued with divine power. The god Thoth, who invented writing, was also the lord of magic. When a scribe inscribed a spell on a wall or papyrus, he was not merely recording, it was an act of creation. The written word could summon, protect, or destroy. This belief elevated the role of scribes in Egyptian society. They were not only record keepers, but also intermediaries between the seen and unseen worlds. One important distinction in Egyptian thought was between good and bad magic. All magic drew upon the same cosmic force, Heka, but its moral value depended on intent. Protective spells, healing rituals, and funerary texts were seen as positive uses. However, Egyptians also believed in malevolent magic. Enemies could use spells to cause illness, loss, or madness. These harmful acts were feared, and their practitioners condemned. Curses were sometimes written on figurines or clay pots, which were then broken in symbolic destruction. Magical protection was therefore a constant concern. People sought to shield themselves, their families, and even their homes from unseen threats. In state affairs, Heka was used to protect the nation. Pharaohs commissioned protective spells to be buried in foundations of temples or written on city walls. These inscriptions often called upon gods like Sekhmet or Bes to repel disease and demons. Battle spells were also used before military campaigns. Soldiers might carry amulets or recite charms to strengthen their courage and ensure victory. Despite the rise and fall of dynasties, the use of Heka remained a consistent feature of Egyptian life. Even during periods of foreign rule, when new gods and cultural influences entered Egypt, magic endured. Greek and Roman authors wrote about Egyptian magicians with awe and fascination, often misunderstanding the complexity of Heka, but recognizing its cultural power. What made Egyptian magic so enduring was its holistic nature. It was not a separate field or hidden practice. It was embedded in religion, medicine, governance, and daily life. It required no priesthood to control it, though priests were often its masters. It was available to anyone willing to learn, believe, and speak with intention. It was a sacred technology, not for manipulation, but for alignment with the gods, with Ma'at, and with the natural world. In the end, Heka was the current that flowed beneath every myth, every ritual, and every divine act. It gave voice to prayers, power to gods, and hope to mortals. It reminded the Egyptians that the world was not mechanical or accidental, but alive with purpose, and that, with the right knowledge and care, they could shape their destiny. Temples were the beating heart of Egyptian religious life, monuments not just of stone and ritual, but of cosmic purpose. They were not simply places of worship in the modern sense. For the ancient Egyptians, a temple was where the divine and human worlds met, where sacred order was renewed daily, and where the gods were cared for as living beings. Every brick, column, and inscription was designed to reflect the principles of Ma'at and the stories of the gods. By the time of the Old Kingdom, which began around the 27th century BCE, temple construction had already become an essential function of the state. Pharaohs were expected not only to commission temples, but to maintain their rituals. These structures were seen as gifts to the gods, offered in exchange for their continued protection and blessings. But beyond royal patronage, temples served as centers of learning, administration, and social organization. They were both spiritual hubs and engines of civilization. Each temple was dedicated to one or more deities, often ones that held particular importance in the region. For example, the Temple of Amun at Karnak was the religious center of Thebes and one of the largest temple complexes ever built. The Temple of Horus at Edfu, constructed during the Ptolemaic period, remains one of the best preserved, offering invaluable insights into ancient ritual practice. But even smaller towns had their own sacred enclosures, some no more than a modest shrine to a local deity or protective spirit. The architectural layout of temples followed a highly symbolic plan. From the outer courtyard to the inner sanctuary, every section represented a different part of the cosmic structure. The approach to the temple mirrored the journey from the mundane world into the divine realm. At the farthest point, the inner sanctum, stood the cult statue of the god, hidden from public view, tended only by the high priests and, on special occasions, the pharaoh himself. This statue was not a decoration. It was the physical seat of the god's presence on earth, inhabited during rituals through invocation and offering. Priests were responsible for maintaining the god's presence through daily rituals. These ceremonies, conducted before dawn, followed a strict pattern. The temple doors were opened, incense was burned, hymns were chanted, and the statue was cleansed, dressed, and offered food. These were not symbolic gestures. The gods were believed to require actual care, and neglecting their needs risked divine withdrawal or punishment. The priesthood was a highly organized and hierarchical institution. At the top stood the high priest, often titled first prophet of the god, who oversaw all temple activities and reported directly to the king. Beneath him were ranks of priests responsible for different duties: ritual specialists, scribes, astronomers, and healers. Some priests served full-time, while others rotated in and out on a schedule, maintaining other occupations during their time away from temple service. Purity was a key concern. Priests shaved their heads and bodies, bathed multiple times a day, and adhered to strict dietary restrictions. They wore clean white linen and abstained from certain foods and activities to remain ritually clean. These practices emphasized their separation from the ordinary world and their role as intermediaries between humans and the divine. Temples also served as centers of knowledge and education. Within their walls, scribes copied sacred texts, astronomical records, medical treatises, and legal documents. Many of the surviving papyri, such as the Ebers Medical Papyrus or the Book of the Dead, were either written or preserved by temple scribes. The House of Life, a special part of the temple complex, functioned as a library and scriptorium where priests studied the sacred sciences and passed them down to future generations. The economic role of temples cannot be overstated. They owned vast tracts of land, controlled agricultural production, employed thousands of workers, and operated storage facilities and workshops. In many ways, a major temple functioned as a city within a city. Its influence extended into the daily lives of the population, from taxation and land management to the hiring of artisans and the distribution of surplus goods. Festivals were among the most public and spectacular expressions of temple life. These celebrations honored the gods, marked seasonal transitions, and reinforced the connection between the community and the divine. One of the most famous was the Opet festival in Thebes, during which the statues of Amun, Mut, and Khonsu were paraded from Karnak to Luxor Temple. These processions, accompanied by music, dancing, and feasting, brought the gods out of their sanctuaries and into the sight of ordinary people, offering them a rare moment of direct connection with the divine. While daily temple rituals were conducted by priests on behalf of the people, festivals were communal events. Participants decorated the streets, sang hymns, and offered prayers. These moments reminded everyone, from the lowest laborer to the highest noble, that they lived in a divinely ordered universe, and that their actions mattered in maintaining that order. Temples also had political importance. A powerful high priest, especially in centers like Thebes or Memphis, could wield influence comparable to that of the royal court. During the late New Kingdom and Third Intermediate Period, the high priests of Amun held enormous authority, sometimes rivaling the pharaoh. This interweaving of religious and political power was both a strength and a source of tension within the state. Despite their grandeur, temples were not eternal. Many were damaged or destroyed during times of upheaval, such as foreign invasions or periods of civil unrest. Others were gradually abandoned as religious practices changed. Yet, even in decay, their influence persisted. The sacred geography of Egypt remained marked by these holy spaces, and many continued to be revered long after their original function had faded. With the arrival of Christianity in the later Roman period, many temples were closed or converted. But the memory of their sacred role remained, preserved in the myths, art, and architecture they left behind. Even today, temples like Karnak, Philae, and Dendera inspire awe and wonder, testaments to a civilization that saw the divine not as distant and abstract, but as present and personal. While the grandeur of Egypt's temples and the sacred duties of its priests formed the visible structure of its religious life, mythology in ancient Egypt extended far beyond formal spaces. For the ordinary Egyptian, whether farmer, artisan, merchant, or child, religion was not distant or abstract. It was deeply personal, immediate, and woven into the rhythms of daily life. Through amulets, household rituals, bedtime stories, and everyday practices, the myths of the gods were made real in the hearts and homes of the people. The first and most tangible connection between the gods and common people came through amulets. These small, often colorful objects were far more than decorative. They were believed to possess real protective power, infused with the energy of the god or symbol they represented. Crafted from materials such as faience, carnelian, turquoise, or gold, amulets were worn around the neck, sewn into clothing, placed under pillows, or buried with the dead. Some of the most popular amulets included the Eye of Horus, also known as the Wedjat, symbolizing protection and healing. This powerful symbol came from the myth in which Horus's eye is damaged in battle with Set and then miraculously restored. The restoration of the eye became a metaphor for recovery and wholeness. Wearing the Eye of Horus offered safety from illness, envy, or spiritual harm. Another widely used amulet was the Ankh, the symbol of life. Shaped like a looped cross, the Ankh represented both physical vitality and the eternal soul. Parents might tie an Ankh charm around a child's wrist or hang one in a doorway for general blessings. The scarab beetle, associated with Khepri, the god of the rising sun, was also extremely common. It stood for renewal, transformation, and the daily rebirth of life. Scarab amulets were often inscribed with short prayers or the names of gods and placed in tombs or carried by travelers for protection. Women, particularly mothers, often relied on the power of household deities such as Bes and Taweret. These two gods, though rarely seen in formal temple worship, were beloved in private life. Bes, a dwarf-like figure with a lion's mane and a fierce expression, was the guardian of childbirth, music, and domestic joy. He was depicted on beds, mirrors, and cosmetic jars, playing a tambourine or sticking out his tongue to ward off evil spirits. Though humorous in appearance, Bes had a serious role: to defend the home from unseen threats. Taweret, a goddess combining the features of a hippopotamus, lion, and crocodile, protected pregnant women and newborns. Her image often appeared on amulets, headrests, and water jugs. Many women prayed to her during childbirth, believing she would protect both mother and child from complications and malevolent forces. Ordinary Egyptians also engaged with myth through stories and oral traditions. These tales were told at family gatherings during work or around the hearth. Some stories were moral lessons, while others were simply entertaining narratives featuring gods and magical creatures. One popular tale, preserved on papyrus, is the story of the shipwrecked sailor. In it, a sailor stranded on a mysterious island encounters a giant serpent who offers wisdom and safe passage home. While not directly tied to the major myth cycles, such stories reflect the Egyptian worldview, where magic, the divine, and the natural world are closely linked. Another well-known narrative is the tale of two brothers, which includes elements of betrayal, transformation, and divine intervention. These stories, passed down through generations, help to explain values such as loyalty, truthfulness, and resilience in the face of adversity. They also kept mythology alive in a more personal, relatable form. Dreams, too, played a part in religious life. Egyptians believed that dreams could serve as messages from the gods or the dead. Dream interpreters, sometimes associated with temples but often operating independently, would help people understand the significance of their visions. A dream of falling could be seen as a warning. A dream of a bright light might indicate divine favor. Dream books, found on ostraca or papyri, offered guides for interpretation, listing common dream symbols and their meanings. Household shrines were another important element of private devotion. Many homes had small altars or niches where statues or images of favored gods were kept. Offerings of bread, beer, incense, or flowers were placed before these altars in thanks or supplication. These acts were not regulated by priestly authority. They were spontaneous, heartfelt expressions of individual faith. In some cases, ordinary people would make pilgrimages to larger temples, particularly during festivals. The major festivals allowed brief but powerful interaction between the public and the divine. During these celebrations, gods were paraded in sacred barks through the streets or floated along the Nile. People lined the roads, sang hymns, clapped and danced. They threw petals, burned incense, and lifted prayers as the god statue passed by. These events reaffirmed the god's presence in the lives of all Egyptians, not just the elite. Worship in personal life was not limited to official deities. Ancestor veneration played a significant role. Many families believed that their deceased relatives could intercede with the gods on their behalf. Letters to the dead, written on pottery or papyrus, have been found across Egypt. These texts request help with disputes, illness, or financial hardship. "Help me win my case," one letter reads, "as you once helped me in life." Such practices show a deeply relational view of the spiritual world, where bonds of family and love extended beyond the grave. Agricultural life also reinforced the mythological worldview. Planting and harvesting were not only economic tasks, but sacred rituals. The growth of grain was seen as the body of Osiris, who died and was reborn with the seasons. Farmers sometimes buried small statues of Osiris made of soil and seed, which would sprout into green shoots. This custom was not just symbolic. It was a form of living myth where the cycle of death and rebirth played out in the soil. Craftsmen, too, saw their work as spiritually significant. Stone carvers, painters, and goldsmiths invoked Ptah, the creator god and patron of artisans. Builders often dedicated their tools to the gods and etched short prayers onto their materials. Even the design of furniture, jewelry, and household goods often reflected religious symbolism. Lotus flowers, solar discs, and divine eyes were embedded into objects of daily use, surrounding people with reminders of sacred truths. Children grew up learning about the gods not from formal education, but from the world around them. They saw their parents light incense, wear protective charms, and whisper prayers at dawn. Toys were shaped like animals linked to the gods: crocodiles, cats, hippos. Stories passed from mouth to mouth instilled a sense of wonder and moral structure. Even greetings and common sayings reflected religious belief. Phrases like life, prosperity, and health were blessings spoken throughout the day, echoing temple formulas. People might say, "May Bastet guard your home," or "As Ra rises, may your strength return." These expressions were more than tradition. They were active acknowledgments of the god's presence in daily affairs. Importantly, Egyptian religion in daily life was inclusive. Women participated in rituals, children learned mythic tales, and artisans invoked gods for their crafts. While priests performed the official rites, belief and devotion were shared widely. The gods were not distant, they were protectors, companions, and helpers. As a result, mythology remained alive, not just in grand temples or royal inscriptions, but in kitchens, workshops, farms, and marketplaces. This integration gave Egyptian religion its endurance and flexibility. It could be celebrated in public festivals and in whispered prayers. It could live in monumental stone and in the soft clay of an amulet. To the ancient Egyptians, death was not an end, but a transition. The physical body might decay, but the spirit, if properly guided and protected, could continue its journey into eternity. This belief shaped Egyptian culture at every level, from grand tombs built for kings to simple burial offerings left by commoners. The afterlife was not a vague concept. It was a detailed and structured realm known as the Duat, governed by divine laws and populated with gods, spirits, trials, and judgment. The Duat was more than just an underworld. It was a spiritual landscape through which the soul traveled after death. This realm was both dangerous and transformative. It held beautiful gardens and terrifying beasts, rivers of fire and fields of reeds. Its geography was symbolic, shaped by religious texts and mythic imagination rather than physical observation. But it was understood as real, and every Egyptian expected to journey through it. Entry into the Duat began with death and the proper burial rituals. The body was embalmed and mummified to preserve it as a vessel for the soul. This process, developed as early as the Old Kingdom, was not merely practical, it was sacred. The act of wrapping the body, reciting spells, and placing amulets served to protect the deceased and prepare them for the trials ahead. The soul itself was not a single entity. Egyptian theology described multiple spiritual components. The Ka was the life force, which needed food and offerings to survive. The Ba was the personality or soul, often depicted as a bird with a human head, capable of leaving the tomb to visit the world of the living. The Ak was the transformed, glorified spirit that could dwell among the gods. These parts worked together, and each had to be properly honored to ensure a successful afterlife. As the soul entered the Duat, it encountered a series of challenges. The most detailed accounts of this journey appear in funerary texts such as the Book of the Dead, the Amduat, and the Book of Gates. These texts served as both maps and guides, often inscribed on tomb walls or written on papyri placed in coffins. They provided passwords, spells, and rituals to navigate the underworld. The path through the Duat was long and filled with danger. The deceased would pass through gates guarded by fierce deities, cross lakes of fire, and face monstrous creatures. But they would also encounter friendly gods and spirits who could offer protection. The journey took place over 12 divisions, sometimes referred to as hours, reflecting the nightly voyage of the sun, god Ra, through the underworld. Just as Ra emerged victorious at dawn, the soul hoped to emerge reborn into eternal life. The most critical moment in this journey was the weighing of the heart ceremony, presided over by Osiris, Lord of the afterlife. The heart, believed to be the seat of emotion, memory, and morality, was placed on one side of a scale. On the other side was the feather of Ma'at, the divine principle of truth and balance. If the heart was lighter than, or equal in weight to the feather, the soul was declared righteous and granted passage to paradise. If the heart was heavy with sin, it was devoured by a monstrous being named Ammit, part lion, part hippopotamus, and part crocodile. This annihilation meant the soul would cease to exist, an ultimate punishment in a culture that valued eternity above all. Thoth, the god of wisdom and writing, stood by to record the outcome. Anubis, the jackal-headed god of mummification, often managed the scales. Other gods and spirits, sometimes called the 42 assessors, asked questions or listened to the deceased proclaim their innocence. This declaration, known as the negative confession, included statements like, "I have not stolen, I have not killed, and I have not caused pain." It was not enough to simply pass judgment. The soul had to demonstrate a life lived in harmony with Ma'at. If the soul succeeded, it entered a blissful realm often called the Field of Reeds, a perfected version of earthly Egypt. Here, the righteous could live forever in peace, tending their crops, reuniting with loved ones, and enjoying the beauty of the land without suffering or death. The Field of Reeds was not a realm of clouds or abstract happiness. It was tangible, familiar, and deeply connected to the values and landscape of the Nile Valley. Even in this paradise, rituals continued. The dead still required offerings, which is why tombs were stocked with food, drink, furniture, tools, and even servants in the form of small figurines called ushabti. These statuettes were often inscribed with spells instructing them to perform labor for the deceased in the afterlife. In effect, they served as substitutes, ready to answer when the gods called upon the soul to work. This elaborate vision of the afterlife was not limited to kings or elites. Over time, especially by the Middle Kingdom, access to funerary texts and rituals spread to the broader population. Coffin texts, inscribed inside wooden coffins, appeared among non-royal burials. In the New Kingdom, illustrated papyri of the Book of the Dead were purchased and customized by scribes for anyone who could afford them. Death was the great equalizer, and the promise of a good afterlife was extended to all who lived according to Mayat and could provide the necessary preparations. The concept of judgment and moral accountability was central to Egyptian afterlife beliefs. Unlike some ancient systems that emphasized fate or destiny, Egyptian religion placed great weight on ethical behavior. The gods judged not only what a person believed, but how they acted. This encouraged a culture of moral responsibility. Deeds mattered. Truth, kindness, and fairness were not only socially valued, they were spiritually essential. The connection between the earthly world and the afterlife was also maintained through ongoing acts of remembrance. Families visited tombs, offered food and drink, and spoke the names of the dead. To be forgotten was to risk spiritual death. The ancient saying, "To speak the name of the dead is to make them live again," highlights this belief. Names were carved on tomb walls, statues, and stelae to preserve identity across the ages. In this worldview, death was not a break with life, but a continuation. The dead were not removed from the world. They remained present, influential, and in need of care. Ancestors could offer guidance, deliver warnings through dreams, or intercede with the gods. In return, the living were expected to honor their memory and maintain their rituals. The rituals associated with death and burial were vast and carefully organized. From the opening of the mouth ceremony, which symbolically restored the deceased's senses, to the placement of sacred texts and protective amulets, every detail was filled with meaning. The tomb itself was designed as a home for eternity, decorated with scenes of daily life, mythological journeys, and prayers to the gods. Egyptian beliefs about the afterlife evolved over time, but retained a remarkable consistency in their core themes. The journey through the Duat, the judgment before Osiris, the hope for renewal, and the importance of Ma'at. Even when new influences arrived from foreign cultures, the Egyptian focus on moral conduct and eternal life remained at the center of religious thought. This deep concern for the afterlife inspired some of the greatest achievements of ancient Egypt: the pyramids, the Valley of the Kings, and the intricate art and texts that have survived for millennia. These were not monuments to death, but to life beyond death. They were acts of faith in a universe that valued justice, remembered the righteous, and offered eternity to those who walked in truth. The journey into the afterlife, as envisioned by the ancient Egyptians, was neither abstract nor left to chance. It was carefully charted, richly illustrated, and guided by a body of sacred literature known today as funerary texts. Chief among these was what modern scholars call the Book of the Dead, a term coined by 19th century Egyptologists. The ancient Egyptians themselves referred to it more precisely as the Book of Coming Forth by Day. This was not a single standardized book, but rather a collection of spells, prayers, and illustrations designed to help the deceased navigate the Duat and achieve eternal life. However, the Book of the Dead did not appear all at once. It was the culmination of over 1,000 years of evolving funerary traditions. To understand its significance, we must trace its origins through earlier texts, including the pyramid texts and coffin texts, and observe how these writings reflect changing beliefs about death, the soul, and access to the divine. The earliest known funerary writings in Egypt are the pyramid texts, which began to appear in royal tombs during the 5th dynasty of the Old Kingdom, around the 24th century BCE. These inscriptions were carved directly into the interior walls of pyramids belonging to pharaohs such as Unas, Teti, and Pepi II. The texts consist of hundreds of spells intended to protect the king in the afterlife, assist his resurrection, and ensure his union with the gods, especially with Ra in the sky and Osiris in the underworld. The pyramid texts were deeply theological. They assumed that the king had a unique relationship with the divine. As such, these spells were initially restricted to royalty. Ordinary individuals had no access to them. Their content included invocations to gods, ritual speeches, transformations into birds or stars, and appeals for protection from demonic beings in the Duat. By the Middle Kingdom, the exclusive nature of the afterlife began to change. The coffin texts, which emerged around the 20th century BCE, expanded the availability of funerary spells beyond the pharaoh and royal elite. These texts were written on the inside of wooden coffins used by wealthy non-royals, high-ranking officials, priests, and others who could afford them. The content of the coffin texts included many spells borrowed from the pyramid texts, but also introduced new material. One of the most important innovations of the coffin texts was the introduction of personal moral agency. While the pyramid texts largely assumed the pharaoh's divine status, the coffin texts made room for the idea that an individual's actions in life influenced their fate in the afterlife. They included spells for transformation, guidance through perilous regions of the underworld, and protections from enemies of the dead. The texts also reflected the growing belief that anyone who lived in accordance with Ma'at and received proper burial rites could attain immortality. The evolution from coffin texts to the Book of the Dead occurred during the New Kingdom, beginning in the 16th century BCE. Unlike earlier funerary texts that were written on tomb walls or coffins, the Book of the Dead was typically recorded on rolls of papyrus. These scrolls, sometimes several meters in length, were placed in the tomb with the deceased or tucked into their mummy wrappings. They were personalized, often bearing the name of the deceased, and frequently adorned with vivid illustrations known as vignettes. The Book of the Dead was not a single fixed text. It was a flexible compilation. Scribes could select specific spells from a pool of more than 200, depending on the desires and budget of the deceased's family. These spells were numbered and categorized by later scholars, but in ancient times, they were chosen for their perceived effectiveness in helping the soul reach the afterlife. Among the most iconic spells in the Book of the Dead is Spell 125, which describes the weighing of the heart ritual. This spell includes the negative confession, where the deceased declares their innocence before Osiris and 42 other divine judges. Statements like, "I have not stolen," "I have not killed," and "I have not caused pain" were recited to demonstrate a life lived in accordance with Ma'at. Accompanying illustrations show Anubis adjusting the scales, Thoth recording the outcome, and Ammit waiting to devour the heart if it failed the test. Other spells in the Book of the Dead served more practical or magical purposes. Spells to open the mouth of the deceased so they could speak in the afterlife, spells to avoid traps or crocodiles in the Duat, and spells to transform into animals such as falcons or lotus flowers, forms associated with freedom, rebirth, or divine favor. These texts were not just theological, they were also visual and performative. The illustrations provided a kind of spiritual map, guiding the soul visually as well as verbally. Images of gates, guardians, solar boats, and gods helped make the journey through the underworld less abstract and more comprehensible. In many copies, the deceased is shown standing confidently before Osiris, affirming the power of the text to deliver a favorable judgment. The Book of the Dead was also a product of Egypt's vibrant scribal tradition. It was usually prepared by professional scribes who specialized in religious texts. Wealthier families commissioned elaborate versions with colorful paintings and gold leaf details. Simpler versions, written in black ink on linen or papyrus, were accessible to middle-class Egyptians. Regardless of their form, all versions carried the same purpose: to equip the soul with the knowledge, protection, and moral support needed to survive death and reach eternal life. By the Third Intermediate Period and into the Late Period, the tradition of funerary literature continued to evolve. New compositions such as the Book of Caverns, the Book of the Earth, and the Book of the Heavenly Cow appeared, many focusing on the nocturnal journey of the sun god Ra and the deeper mysteries of the underworld. These texts were often used in royal tombs and were less common among the general population, but they continued the central idea that the afterlife was structured, knowable, and navigable. What made these texts powerful was their fusion of myth, morality, and ritual. They were not abstract philosophies or symbolic poetry. They were tools, living documents meant to be activated through reading, recitation, and ritual. For the Egyptians, words had power. When spoken or written correctly, they could open gates, summon protection, and change the fate of the soul. The combination of language and image created a total religious experience that guided the dead through the most critical journey of existence. Importantly, these funerary texts were not only about the dead, they also shaped how the living understood life, justice, and the divine. Knowing that one's actions would be judged, that one's soul would face divine assessment, encouraged ethical behavior. The texts reminded people that death was not random or meaningless. It was a mirror of life, and it demanded preparation, devotion, and integrity. The legacy of the Book of the Dead and its predecessors endures even today. They have inspired generations of scholars, artists, and spiritual seekers. Museums around the world hold fragments of these ancient scrolls, their hieroglyphs still legible after thousands of years. They are windows into a culture that faced death not with fear, but with careful planning, deep faith, and a remarkable sense of order. As Egypt moved from the Old Kingdom's Pyramid Age into the more dynamic Middle and New Kingdom periods, its religious landscape did not remain static. Mythology evolved. New deities rose to prominence. Older gods were reshaped, reinterpreted, or merged with others. Temples grew larger, more complex, and more regionally influential. And crucially, religious belief began to shift from a focus on state rituals to a more personal and accessible spirituality. These centuries witnessed the deepening of mythological meaning, the expansion of divine roles, and the growing power of local cults, all signs of a religious system that was alive, adaptable, and deeply responsive to its cultural context. The Middle Kingdom, spanning roughly from the early 20th century BCE to the middle of the 17th century BCE, was a time of political reunification and artistic revival. During this period, the religious traditions that had once been largely reserved for pharaohs began to extend more broadly throughout society. This democratization of the afterlife and the increased availability of funerary texts reflected a larger shift in how individuals saw themselves in relation to the gods. The boundaries between royal and common religious experience were beginning to blur. One of the most significant developments of the Middle Kingdom was the rise of Amun, a god whose name means the Hidden One. Originally a local deity of Thebes, Amun gained increasing importance as Thebes became the political center of Egypt. Amun was initially associated with wind and invisibility, but as his cult expanded, he absorbed qualities of other major deities. By the time of the New Kingdom, he was combined with Ra to become Amun-Ra, king of the gods and lord of the cosmos. This syncretism, combining different gods into a single, more powerful form, became a hallmark of Egyptian theological evolution. The merging of Amun with Ra did more than elevate his divine status. It linked him with kingship, solar power, and the creator role, making him both a distant, transcendent deity and a daily, visible presence in the form of the sun. Pharaohs of the New Kingdom, including famous rulers such as Hatshepsut, Thutmose III, and Ramesses II, strongly identified with Amun-Ra. They built massive temples in his honor, most notably the Great Temple Complex at Karnak in Thebes, one of the largest religious structures ever constructed. The cult of Amun was not confined to a priestly elite. It became a central part of public and political life. Temples dedicated to Amun served as economic hubs, employing thousands of workers, scribes, and artisans. Festivals such as the Opet festival brought Amun's image from Karnak to the Luxor temple in grand processions, witnessed by crowds who lined the streets in celebration. These events reinforced the connection between the gods, the king, and the people. Alongside Amun, other gods gained prominence during the New Kingdom, particularly within Thebes. Mut, often called the mother goddess, became the consort of Amun, while their divine child, Khonsu, represented the moon. Together, this divine triad of Amun, Mut, and Khonsu formed the theological foundation of Theban religion, worshipped side by elite priests and ordinary citizens alike. Another important theological trend of this period was the increased personal piety visible in religious practice. While older texts emphasized the king's exclusive relationship with the divine, New Kingdom inscriptions and prayers began to show a more individual connection to the gods. People began to address deities personally, asking for protection, healing, or forgiveness. Stelae from this period often contain inscriptions from private individuals expressing gratitude to the gods or recounting dreams, visions, and answered prayers. For example, inscriptions found at Deir el-Medina, a village of artisans who worked on royal tombs, show that these workers regularly prayed to deities such as Amun, Hathor, and Ptah. They built small chapels and shrines, recorded miracles, and wrote devotional texts asking for divine help in matters of health, justice, and fertility. The gods were no longer seen as distant or only concerned with kingship. They had become guardians of the individual, protectors of homes, and companions in suffering. This development also influenced how myths were understood and retold. The story of Osiris, Isis, and Horus took on deeper emotional and spiritual meaning. Isis was no longer just a queen goddess. She became a model of the faithful wife and mother, a symbol of magical power and resilience. Osiris became the eternal promise of rebirth, not just for kings, but for all who lived righteously. Horus represented the divine son who brings justice and healing. These figures became more accessible, more relatable, and more central to private devotion. Myths also began to take on regional variations, reflecting local religious interests and interpretations. In the Delta, gods such as Neith, the ancient war and weaving goddess of Sais, regained influence. In Memphis, the cult of Ptah, god of craftsmanship and creation by thought and speech, remained strong, especially among artisans and builders. Ptah's theology emphasized the intellectual and verbal power of creation, continuing the Memphite tradition described in earlier texts. In Upper Egypt, especially around Abydos, the cult of Osiris reached new heights. Pilgrimage to Abydos became a major religious event, and symbolic tombs of Osiris were constructed to give worshippers a place to honor him, even if they could not afford to travel. These shrines, often decorated with scenes from Osiris's resurrection and judgment rituals, allowed everyday Egyptians to participate in his myth and draw strength from it. The gods also expanded their portfolios. Hathor, previously known for music, joy, and motherhood, became a goddess of foreign lands, fertility, and even mining. She was worshipped by workers at turquoise mines in the Sinai Peninsula and honored in desert shrines far from the Nile Valley. Her nurturing presence was seen as essential in hostile environments. Sekhmet, the lion-headed goddess of destruction and healing, became more complex in this period as well. She was both feared and revered. Plague and illness were sometimes attributed to her wrath, but prayers and rituals could transform her into a goddess of protection and restoration. Hundreds of statues of Sekhmet were placed in temple courtyards, especially in Karnak, to invoke her strength and mercy. With such a rich and growing pantheon, Egyptian theology in the Middle and New Kingdoms was anything but static. The process of syncretism, where gods with overlapping functions were merged or associated with one another, allowed for flexibility without abandoning tradition. For example, Thoth, the god of wisdom and writing, was sometimes linked with Amun, creating Amun-Thoth, a deity that combined divine intellect with hidden power. This fluidity allowed new ideas to be absorbed without destroying older beliefs. Importantly, these changes were not signs of confusion or decline. They reflected a deeply adaptive system that could respond to political shifts, economic changes, and spiritual needs. The Middle and New Kingdoms saw Egypt expand its empire into Nubia and the Levant, bringing new peoples, languages, and ideas into contact with Egyptian culture. Instead of collapsing under this diversity, Egyptian religion absorbed and reinterpreted it, offering a coherent and resilient vision of the world. By the end of the New Kingdom, however, pressures from within and without began to strain this system. Economic difficulties, regional rivalries, and foreign invasions tested the unity of the Egyptian state. Yet even in times of turmoil, the gods remained present. Temples continued to function. Pilgrimages were made, myths were told and retold. The divine order, though challenged, was never entirely broken. Among the long list of Egyptian pharaohs, one stands apart, not for his military conquests, architectural achievements, or longevity, but for a radical religious experiment that temporarily overturned more than 1,000 years of tradition. This was Akhenaten, a pharaoh of the 18th dynasty, who initiated one of the most extraordinary and controversial episodes in Egyptian history, the worship of a single deity, the Aten, in place of Egypt's long-established pantheon. His reign, which lasted just under 2 decades in the 14th century BCE, was a bold theological revolution that sought to redefine the nature of divinity, kingship, and worship itself. Before his transformation, Akhenaten was known as Amenhotep IV, a name that connected him directly to the state god Amun, who had risen to supreme prominence during the New Kingdom. Like his predecessors, Amenhotep IV began his reign participating in traditional temple rituals and honoring the full array of Egyptian gods. But within a few years, his focus shifted dramatically. He changed his name to Akhenaten, meaning effective for the Aten, and began promoting the Aten, the visible disk of the sun, as the supreme and, eventually, the only legitimate god. This was not simply a shift in emphasis, it was a theological upheaval. Akhenaten abandoned the powerful cult of Amun, closed temples, defunded priesthoods, and ordered the defacement of Amun's name from inscriptions and monuments. In doing so, he challenged not only religious belief, but also the institutional and economic structures that had supported the Egyptian state for centuries. The Aten had previously been a relatively minor aspect of the sun god Ra, a visual representation of the sun's rays. Under Akhenaten, however, the Aten became the center of a new religious system. This god was portrayed not in human or animal form, but as a radiant sun disk with extended rays ending in tiny hands. These rays reached out to bless the royal family and, by extension, the world. The Aten was no longer one deity among many. He was the sole creator, sustainer, and ruler of all life. Akhenaten's new religion also redefined the role of the pharaoh. In earlier theology, the pharaoh was the earthly representative of the gods, particularly Horus. Under Akhenaten, he became the exclusive intermediary between the Aten and humanity. Common people could not worship the Aten directly. Instead, they venerated the royal family, especially Akhenaten and his queen, Nefertiti, who were often depicted in scenes bathed in the Aten's rays. This centralization of divine access marked a significant departure from earlier practices, where individuals could approach a variety of gods for personal needs, protection, and blessings. This religious transformation was accompanied by a bold architectural and artistic program. Akhenaten commissioned a new capital city, Akhetaten, modern-day Amarna, located midway between Thebes and Memphis, along a bend in the Nile. The city's name meant Horizon of the Aten and was designed to reflect the new religious vision. Unlike the dark enclosed temples of earlier gods, Aten's temples were open to the sunlight, with altars placed in roofless courtyards where the sun could shine freely. The layout of the city emphasized transparency, access to light, and a direct connection with the divine. Art from the Amarna period also broke with tradition. While earlier Egyptian art favored idealized forms, stoic pharaohs, balanced poses, and formal compositions, Amarna art introduced a more fluid and intimate style. Akhenaten is shown with elongated limbs, a pronounced belly, and a distinctively shaped face. Scenes depict the royal family in tender moments, playing with children, embracing, and sharing meals. These images, while still symbolic, offered a new kind of visual language that highlighted the humanity of the pharaoh and his family, surrounded by the nurturing rays of the Aten. However, this dramatic break with the past was not without resistance. While evidence of direct rebellion during Akhenaten's lifetime is limited, it is clear that his religious policies created tensions within Egypt's political and religious hierarchy. The powerful priesthoods, particularly those dedicated to Amun, were sidelined. Traditional cult centers were neglected, and the widespread erasure of other gods' names created religious and cultural fractures that could not be ignored indefinitely. Akhenaten's reign also coincided with a period of geopolitical instability. Egypt's influence in the Levant weakened, and internal affairs appeared strained. Letters found at Amarna, now known as the Amarna Letters, reveal correspondence between Egypt and its foreign vassals, many of whom expressed concern over military threats and a lack of Egyptian support. Whether this decline was directly caused by Akhenaten's religious policies or simply coincided with them remains debated, but the perception of weakening authority certainly contributed to his legacy. Following Akhenaten's death, likely around the middle of the 14th century BCE, his religious reforms unraveled quickly. His immediate successor, a mysterious figure named Smenkhkare, may have ruled briefly, possibly as co-regent or as an independent ruler. Soon after, the child king Tutankhaten came to the throne. Within a few years, his name was changed to Tutankhamun, signaling the restoration of the old religion and the return of Amun to his former status. Under Tutankhamun's rule, and even more aggressively under his successors Ai and Horemheb, the temples of the Aten were closed or repurposed. The city of Akhetaten was abandoned. Akhenaten's name was omitted from king lists and official records. Monuments from his reign were dismantled or hidden. The traditional pantheon was reinstated, and the priesthoods regained their influence. This process of deliberate erasure came to be known among scholars as damnatio memoriae, a Latin term meaning condemnation of memory. Yet, despite these efforts, Akhenaten was not forgotten. His city and texts, buried beneath centuries of sand, were rediscovered in the 19th century. The boldness of his vision, the beauty of Amarna art, and the complexity of his theology continue to fascinate historians and archaeologists. The nature of Akhenaten's belief system has been the subject of intense debate. Was he a true monotheist, worshipping a single god to the exclusion of all others? Or was his Atenism a form of henotheism, elevating one god without denying the existence of others? Some scholars have even drawn comparisons between Akhenaten's vision and later monotheistic traditions, though these parallels should be approached with caution. Egyptian religion, including Akhenaten's version, remained deeply embedded in its own cultural, symbolic, and theological context. What is certain is that Akhenaten's experiment marked a radical departure from everything that came before. It reimagined the nature of the divine, centralized spiritual authority in the person of the king and attempted to unify religious practice under a single, universal light. And while his revolution ultimately failed, it demonstrated the capacity of Egyptian religion to question, adapt, and evolve, even in ways that defied its own long-standing principles. Akhenaten's story also offers a powerful reminder of how myth and power are intertwined. By redefining the divine order, he redefined the social and political structure. By removing the gods, he removed the networks of influence that supported them, and in doing so, he revealed both the possibilities and the limits of religious transformation in a deeply traditional society. After the brief but dramatic religious revolution of Akhenaten, Egypt did not merely return to its old ways, it reasserted and reshaped them. The Amarna experiment had disrupted not only the religious traditions of the elite priesthoods, but also the spiritual rhythms of everyday Egyptian life. Its sudden collapse left a vacuum. Into that space, Egypt poured both a renewed devotion to its ancestral gods and a reaffirmation of mythological foundations that had shaped society for centuries. Yet this restoration was not a simple rollback. It was a conscious effort to stabilize, legitimize, and revitalize Egyptian religion, drawing upon the enduring strength of tradition while acknowledging the damage that had been done. The process of restoring the traditional gods and their temples began during the reign of Tutankhamun, who ascended the throne as a child shortly after Akhenaten's death. Originally named Tutankhaten, or living image of the Aten, his name was changed to Tutankhamun, living image of Amun, signaling a public and theological break with Atenism. This was no small act. It was a royal declaration that the gods of Egypt had returned and that the proper cosmic balance, represented by Ma'at, was being re-established. Under Tutankhamun and his advisors, particularly the powerful court official Ai and later General Horemheb, steps were taken to revive temple worship. Shrines to Amun were reopened. Statues of gods that had been defaced or neglected were repaired. Inscriptions that had been chiseled away were restored or replaced. The city of Akhetaten was abandoned, and administrative functions returned to more traditional centers like Memphis and Thebes. Tutankhamun's restoration efforts were modest in scale, partly due to his young age and short reign, but they set a crucial precedent. He issued official decrees stating that the temples were fallen into ruin, and that offerings to the gods had ceased, causing Egypt to suffer. His administration worked to resume the regular temple rituals, reinstate the priesthoods, and re-establish the festivals that had once united the country in collective worship. However, the true architect of religious recovery was Horemheb, a former military general who became pharaoh after the brief reigns of Tutankhamun and Ai. Horemheb launched a vigorous campaign to restore order and re-legitimize Egypt's religious and political systems. He systematically removed the names of Amarna period rulers from official records and replaced them with his own, effectively erasing the memory of Akhenaten from formal history. Horemheb also initiated major rebuilding projects. He commissioned temples, repaired sacred structures, and issued laws aimed at curbing corruption among priests and officials. His reign marked a return to religious orthodoxy, but it also revealed a new awareness of the delicate balance between king, gods, and people. While Amun's cult was restored, there was greater emphasis on a shared responsibility to uphold Ma'at. The traumatic break caused by Akhenaten had shown how fragile that balance could be. Following Horemheb, the 19th dynasty began with Ramesses I, a career soldier who ruled briefly but established a powerful new line. His son, Seti I, and grandson, Ramesses II, continued the religious revival with unprecedented zeal. Their reigns are often viewed as a golden age of restoration, and they used religion not only to heal, but to strengthen Egypt's identity. Seti I undertook extensive temple construction. His temple at Abydos, dedicated to Osiris and other major gods, was a monumental reaffirmation of mythological tradition. Carvings and reliefs inside the temple depict detailed scenes of rituals, offerings, and divine processions. One of the most significant inscriptions found at Abydos is the so-called King List, a chronological list of Egypt's rulers, carefully omitting the names of Akhenaten and his immediate successors. This deliberate act of erasure reinforced the message that Amarna had been a deviation, not part of the true divine order. Ramesses II, also known as Ramesses the Great, carried this mythological resurgence even further. His building projects stretched across Egypt and into Nubia. The temples of Abu Simbel, carved directly into the cliffs of southern Egypt, are among the most iconic symbols of divine kingship and religious power. One of the two temples at Abu Simbel is dedicated to the gods Amun, Raharakti, and Ptah. three major deities who symbolized creation, light, and craftsmanship. The alignment of the temple with the sun's rays, which illuminate the inner sanctuary on specific days of the year, reinforces the integration of myth, astronomy, and royal authority. During these reigns, the fusion of gods became even more pronounced. Amun-Ra remained dominant, but other deities were frequently combined or associated with each other in theological texts and temple inscriptions. This practice of syncretism allowed the pantheon to remain cohesive while still reflecting regional preferences and evolving spiritual understandings. For example, Ra-Horakhti, a combination of Ra and Horus of the horizon, embodied both the solar and sky aspects of divinity. Similarly, Ta-Sokar-Osiris brought together Memphis's creator god, a funerary deity, and the lord of the underworld into one theological figure, emphasizing regeneration and resurrection. These fusions were not random. They were carefully constructed expressions of a complex worldview in which different divine forces could operate simultaneously and harmoniously. Another major theme of the post-Amarna period was the reaffirmation of personal piety. While earlier periods had already seen individuals praying directly to gods and dedicating personal stelae, the post-Amarna era witnessed a flowering of this kind of devotion. People continued to build chapels, offer prayers, and inscribe stelae thanking deities for protection, healing, or answered prayers. These acts were not isolated or exceptional. They became widespread, showing that myth and worship had fully returned to the lives of ordinary people. One particularly rich source of evidence for personal religious life comes from the workers' village at Deir el-Medina, where tomb artisans and their families lived. Excavations at the site have revealed hundreds of personal stelae, votive offerings, and graffiti invoking a wide array of gods. Deities such as Amun, Hathor, and Thoth were frequently mentioned, but so were less prominent gods, reflecting a diverse and living religious landscape. Importantly, the return to traditional mythological themes after Amarna was not a rejection of all that had occurred. Some theological ideas from the Amarna period, such as the emphasis on light, the visible sun, and a more personal connection to divinity, left their imprint. While the exclusive worship of Aten was abandoned, the broader interest in the sun's power and its daily renewal continued to shape religious language and temple design. The religious experience had grown more personal, more immediate, and perhaps more introspective. Even in the realm of funerary belief, innovation continued. The Book of the Dead remained popular, but new texts such as the Book of Caverns and the Book of the Earth gained prominence in royal tombs. These writings delved deeper into the mysteries of the underworld, portraying the Duat as a place of profound transformation, where gods, including Ra and Osiris, interacted in ever more complex ways. The emphasis on resurrection, moral judgment, and the cyclical nature of existence remained central. The mythological resurgence following the Amarna period was not merely a conservative reaction. It was a re-anchoring of Egyptian identity, a reaffirmation of timeless truths made more urgent by their temporary disruption. It proved that Egyptian religion, though grounded in tradition, was resilient enough to absorb challenge and emerge even stronger. As the Ramesside era continued, Egypt maintained its devotion to the gods of its ancestors, erecting temples and writing hymns that echoed voices from millennia past. Yet new winds were beginning to blow. Foreign powers, shifting alliances, and internal divisions would gradually weaken Egypt's unity. And while the gods remained, they would soon be joined, and sometimes challenged, by the influences of outsiders who brought their own myths and ways of worship. As Egypt entered the final centuries of its ancient history, it stood at the crossroads of cultures, empires, and religious transformations. The conquest of Egypt by foreign powers brought new influences that would forever alter the fabric of its mythology. First the Persians, then the Macedonian Greeks under Alexander the Great, and finally the Romans. Each brought their own beliefs, practices, and institutions. Yet rather than erasing Egyptian religion outright, these conquerors engaged with it, sometimes embracing, sometimes reshaping it. The result was a fascinating period of religious fusion, reinvention, and, ultimately, the slow decline of traditional mythic power. The arrival of Alexander the Great in Egypt in the late 4th century BCE marked the beginning of a new era. Unlike earlier invaders, Alexander portrayed himself not as a foreign conqueror, but as a liberator from Persian rule. He made efforts to present himself in accordance with Egyptian tradition. At the oracle of Amun at Siwa Oasis, he was declared the son of Amun, aligning himself with pharaonic ideology. Though Greek by birth and culture, Alexander recognized the importance of religious legitimacy in Egyptian eyes. After his death, his general Ptolemy established a new dynasty of Greek rulers, known today as the Ptolemaic dynasty. These rulers governed Egypt for nearly 3 centuries, blending Greek and Egyptian traditions to create a hybrid religious and cultural environment. The Ptolemies adopted many aspects of Egyptian kingship, including the divine titles of pharaohs, participation in religious festivals, and temple construction. They supported the traditional gods and priesthoods, understanding that religion was key to maintaining stability and loyalty among the native population. One of the most remarkable religious developments during this period was the creation of Serapis, a new deity designed to appeal to both Greek and Egyptian audiences. Serapis combined features of the Egyptian gods Osiris and Apis with aspects of the Greek gods Zeus, Hades, and Asclepius. He was depicted in Greek artistic style, bearded, majestic, enthroned, but retained Egyptian symbolic attributes. Serapis was worshipped in temples built in both Egyptian and Hellenistic architectural forms and became especially prominent in Alexandria, the new capital founded by Alexander. This process of religious syncretism, the merging of different religious traditions, defined the Greco-Roman period in Egypt. Traditional Egyptian deities like Isis, Horus, and Anubis continued to be worshipped, but they were increasingly interpreted through a Greek lens. Greek texts described Isis as a universal goddess, ruler of fate and protector of sailors, mothers, and cities. Her cult spread far beyond Egypt, reaching Italy, Greece, and even parts of Gaul and Spain. In Roman times, Isis was one of the most widely venerated deities in the Mediterranean world. Isis's appeal was more than theological. Her mythology, which emphasized mourning, devotion, magical knowledge, and resurrection, resonated with a wide audience. Temples to Isis were built in cities like Pompeii and Rome. Mystery cults emerged around her, offering initiates secret rites that promised spiritual renewal and protection in the afterlife. These cults, which shared some features with the later mystery religions of Greece and Rome, helped Egyptian mythological themes survive and evolve in foreign settings. The Temple of Philae, located on an island in the Nile, became a major center of Isis worship during the Greco-Roman period. Despite Egypt's declining political autonomy, Philae thrived as a pilgrimage site. Even when most temples across the empire were falling into neglect, Philae remained active. Priests continued performing rituals and recording inscriptions well into the Roman era. It was, in many ways, the last stronghold of ancient Egyptian religion. Other deities also found new life during this time. Anubis, traditionally the god of embalming and guide of souls, was linked with the Greek god Hermes to form Hermanubis, a deity associated with the underworld and spiritual transition. Similarly, Horus became closely identified with Apollo, and Harpocrates, the Hellenistic child form of Horus, gained popularity in Roman religious art. These hybrid deities reflect both the adaptability of Egyptian religion and the ways in which it influenced and was influenced by other Mediterranean traditions. However, the Greco-Roman period also witnessed the gradual weakening of traditional religious institutions. The power of the Egyptian priesthood, once dominant in political and economic affairs, declined as Roman governors and officials took control of administrative functions. While emperors such as Augustus and Hadrian made symbolic gestures of respect toward Egyptian traditions, commissioning temple restorations or appearing in pharaonic dress, the true political authority lay elsewhere. At the same time, changes in religious sentiment across the Roman Empire were transforming the spiritual landscape. Philosophical movements such as Neoplatonism introduced more abstract and universal ideas of divinity, which resonated with aspects of Egyptian theology but also shifted attention away from traditional myth. The rise of Christianity, beginning in the 1st century CE, brought a fundamentally different worldview, one that increasingly came into conflict with Egypt's ancient religious system. Early Christians in Egypt encountered a society still rich in mythological imagery and religious practice. But over time, as Christianity gained legal status and then imperial support, traditional cults faced increasing suppression. Temples were closed, rituals were outlawed, and the old gods were declared demons or false idols. Resistance persisted in some regions, especially in Upper Egypt, where temples like Philae continued functioning into the 6th century CE. But the writing was on the wall. The final blow came during the reign of the Byzantine Emperor Justinian, who ordered the closure of all remaining pagan temples. The Temple of Isis at Philae, which had operated for more than 400 years under Roman rule, was shuttered by imperial decree. Priests were expelled, and the sacred spaces that had once echoed with hymns and incense fell silent. What followed was not the complete erasure of Egyptian mythology, but its transformation. Elements of Egyptian thought, concepts of resurrection, divine judgment, and sacred imagery, found echoes in early Christian art and doctrine. Symbols like the Ankh, the Eye of Horus, and the winged sun continued to appear in decorative and religious contexts, reinterpreted within new frameworks. Mythology was no longer a living religious system, but it survived in art, literature, and memory. In the centuries that followed, Egypt's ancient religion faded from view. Knowledge of hieroglyphs was lost. The names of gods were misremembered or misunderstood. Temples were buried beneath sand or reused as churches and mosques. For much of the medieval and early modern period, Egyptian mythology lived on only in fragments, through Greek and Roman writers, travelers' tales, and exotic depictions. It was not until the modern era, with the decipherment of hieroglyphs by Jean-François Champollion in the 19th century, that the voices of ancient Egypt began to speak again. Texts, tombs, and temples revealed a rich mythological world that had shaped the lives of millions over millennia. Scholars, artists, and spiritual seekers rediscovered the stories of Isis and Osiris, the journey of Ra through the underworld, and the wisdom of Thoth. The decline of mythic power in the Greco-Roman period was, therefore, not an ending, but a transition. Egyptian mythology had endured wars, invasions, revolutions, and repression. In the face of overwhelming change, it had adapted, transformed, and reached far beyond its original homeland. While the temples fell quiet, the myths themselves remained, carried forward by memory, inscription, and the enduring power of story. More than 2,000 years have passed since the last priests offered prayers in the Temple of Isis at Philae. The statues have been silenced, the rituals forgotten, and the sacred spaces left to wind, sand, and stone. Yet the mythology of ancient Egypt has never truly disappeared. It endures, not just in the monuments or museum displays, but in modern memory, language, symbolism, and belief. From the 19th century onward, the rediscovery of Egypt's past, through archaeology, decipherment, and scholarship, brought ancient mythology back into focus. When Jean-François Champollion cracked the code of hieroglyphs in the 1820s, it opened access to texts that had been unreadable for over a millennium. Tomb walls, stelae, and papyri could now be interpreted, giving modern audiences a direct view into the mythological and religious thoughts of a civilization that had once believed it could speak with gods. As Egyptology grew as a discipline, Egyptian mythology began to influence literature, philosophy, and popular culture. Writers from the Romantic and Victorian eras were fascinated by the exoticism and antiquity of Egyptian religion. Later, film and television embraced the imagery of pharaohs, pyramids, and ancient curses, often with little historical accuracy but undeniable cultural impact. From blockbuster movies to children's books, references to Ra, Anubis, Isis, and Osiris are widespread. In more scholarly and spiritual circles, the mythology of ancient Egypt has been revisited through new lenses. Some interpret Egyptian myths through the frameworks of depth psychology, seeing in the stories of death and rebirth, divine conflict, and cosmic order reflections of the human psyche. Others explore Egyptian symbols and deities in modern esoteric or neo-pagan practices, seeking timeless wisdom in ancient narratives. But beyond symbolism and adaptation, there are deeper historical lessons to be drawn from the story of Egyptian mythology. One such lesson is continuity. Egyptian mythological thought developed across more than 3,000 years, yet it retained core principles: the struggle between order and chaos, the importance of Ma'at, the cycle of life, death, and rebirth. Despite political upheaval, foreign invasions, and theological revolutions, these themes endured. They served not only religious purposes, but also social and political ones, providing a framework for law, kingship, identity, and moral behavior. Another lesson is adaptability. Egyptian mythology was not frozen in time. It responded to changing conditions. Gods were combined, reinterpreted, and expanded. Religious practice absorbed new ideas, incorporated regional variations, and even confronted monotheistic experiments. This flexibility allowed Egyptian religion to remain relevant through dynasties, empires, and foreign rule. We also learn about the deep integration of myth into everyday life. Egyptian mythology was not separate from agriculture, politics, medicine, or household routine. It shaped the calendar, explained illness, justified the authority of rulers, and gave comfort to the grieving. Gods were present not only in temples but in kitchens, workshops, and along village paths. This intimate relationship between myth and lived experience reveals a model of religion as a daily, participatory reality, not distant theology. At the same time, the eventual decline of Egyptian mythology illustrates the fragility of cultural systems. Even a tradition that lasted for millennia can fade when its foundations, political, linguistic, economic, erode. The closure of temples, the rise of new religions, and the loss of literacy all contributed to the end of a religious worldview that had once felt eternal. Its disappearance is a reminder that history moves and that continuity must be actively sustained. And yet, what still resonates today is the human effort to find meaning in the cosmos. The Egyptians did not worship their gods out of fear or superstition alone. They sought understanding. They asked where the world came from, how justice should be maintained, what happens after death, and how humans might live in harmony with a greater order. These are questions that remain as relevant now as they were 5,000 years ago. The myth of Osiris still speaks to the power of renewal. The journey of Ra through darkness still reminds us of resilience and daily restoration. The concept of Ma'at still offers a vision of balance that feels urgently needed in today's fractured world. Egyptian mythology was never about blind belief. It was about aligning with a vision of reality in which everything had its place, where even chaos had a role, and death was not the end but a transformation. That legacy endures not because we still worship these gods, but because we still ask the same questions. We still look to the skies, to the earth, and to the unseen, wondering where we come from and where we are going. And in that search, the voices of ancient Egypt, carved in stone and carried in myth, still echo, quietly but clearly, reminding us that humanity has always reached for meaning beyond the visible world.